What if Derek Hale came to save his cousin and Forks? Charlie sat down the phone sighing heavily. He beckoned his daughter forward and she leaned against him. There are some things I haven't told you, and considering you just filled me in on everything that is going on, it's only right I tell you the truth. Bella frowned, tilting her head. I didn't want you getting mixed up in all this supernatural business, but I guess that's pointless now, right? I have a brother. You've met him when you were just a child. His name is Peter Hale, and he has a nephew, Derek Hale. Derek and Peter are werewolves, not like the shifters here. Full moon walk on hind legs, but they're good people, and I think they can help you. They live in California, and I think it's best you go to stay with them. They can protect you better. The shifters here don't give a shit, and I can't just let some bloodthirsty bastards think they can terrorize you. He sighed heavily. Derek will be here in a few days to collect you now, kid. You're 19, and I can't tell you what to do, but I won't tell you this for nothing. Bella hugged Charlie close. No, I can't protect myself against them, and what about you? I can't just leave you to face this on your own. Charlie shook his head, rubbing her back in comfort. Yes, you can. It'll be alright, as much as the wolves don't like the situation I'm untouchable. I want you to start packing and get whatever you think you'll need for this. School is over, so there's no obligation to that. I promise you we'll figure this out. Bella frowned, looking over her shoulder, once again eyeing the black Camaro that was slowly moving across the street. It would just be her luck that some weirdo was following her a day before the cousin she never knew she had was supposed to pick her up. It would be a better way to go out than being killed by a vampire shapeshifter, though after Edward left and the whole fiasco with saving his life in Italy, Edward had become dark, while his behavior never escalated to something physical. Bella was terrified that something bad would happen if she let their relationship continue. Only things didn't go the way she thought they would. Edward had started threatening her, using Charlie against her or even her mother. She locked the window in her bedroom and woke up many nights to small cracks from pebbles being thrown at a hard force. She had gone to Jacob, telling him that Edward was becoming a threat, and to not only her but her father, and maybe even the population of Forks. She was surprised when Jacob gave her the cold shoulder, leaving her on her own to deal with the problem herself. She had tried to go to Sam, and he too basically kicked her to the curb. Seth and Embry were the only two wolves that tried to fight in her corner. But an alpha order later, and all she had to turn to was Charlie. Charlie had noticed a change in her, begging to know what was going on. He had noticed her recluse over the last year. His inseparable daughter was like a shell, always walking on eggshells. She stayed quiet at first, not wanting to put her father in any danger, but after a while, she knew that she had to warn her father of the danger she had unknowingly put him in. She broke down one morning, giving Charlie any and all information on the supernatural world she was living in. She didn't go into detail about why she was in danger, as she didn't want to unload on him all of her problems. It was just the other day that she told him everything, including the shifters and their blatant hatred for her, that they didn't really care whether she lived or died, and how dark things had really gotten. Charlie was determined though, and he would do whatever it took to save his daughter. He immediately called Peter, and Peter was all too willing to get him in touch with Derek to help save his niece from the situation she was in. Derek was reluctant at first, having to deal with his own pack at the moment, but eventually knew that he couldn't just let the poor girl rot, and she was family. Blood or not. He'd make his conclusions about her when he met her. So here he was following his unnaturally very observant cousin down the darkening streets of Port Angeles. He had to shake his head though as she was walking alone, hurrying down the street. It seemed that she was picking up some things for their move, and he had come a day early. He wanted to scope things out a bit, get a feel for the place. He put his car in park and cut off the ignition before stepping out and following her on foot. He knew he should probably introduce himself, but he wanted to see what she was like. He could tell that she was observant for one. She had turned many times to stare in his general direction, and he knew that he probably looked like a creep, but he wanted to lay low. She could be being followed, and he didn't want to alert any creatures of his presence just yet. He followed for a good few minutes at a safe distance before she turned the corner. Derek paused, tilting his head to the side to listen for anything important. He heard her spike in heart rate, wondering if it was him who was causing her heart to pump faster. Hello, he listened as she seemed to be having a conversation with someone on the phone. Her voice wavered as she answered. He heard her sharp intake of breath before she was uttering, "Just leave me alone." Derek listened closely as he heard something clatter to the ground before he heard a crackling sound. He threw being observant out the window as he stalked his way towards the alley, where she had disappeared off to. She was rounding the corner as well, screaming in fright as they bumped into each other. He brought out his hands to steady her, narrowing his eyes. Bella swallowed heavily, looking up at him. "Excuse me," she whispered, making a move to go around him. He stopped her. "I'm assuming Uncle Charlie hadn't gotten around to showing you what I look like." He smiled a comforting smile at her, hoping to ease her nerves and rid the scent of fear that assaulted his nose. Her eyes widened and she looked around before looking back at him. "Derek Hale," he nodded, holding out his hand for her to shake. She grasped it, a feeling of safety already washing over her at his presence. He looked her over, finding that she had long brown hair, very small for a girl her age, and it looked like she needed to add on a few pounds. He could smell the stress rolling off her in waves. She was very pale with big brown eyes and a hair-chipped face. She stood at maybe 53 hour early she says, and he turns to walk with her. I wanted to scope things out a bit, Peter wasn't very helpful with providing me with all of the information, so why don't you fill me in? Bella walked next to him telling him everything, how she met Edward, how she had even fallen in love with him, the horrible baseball game and that event, as well as the birthday disaster, and what followed, how she found out about the shifters. She didn't leave anything out, even telling him about Edward's threats and his darkening behavior. I feel if I don't get out Hess going to kill me, she whispers, rubbing her hands up and down her arms as it was getting chilly. Derek shrugged out of his jacket and placed it on her shoulders, keeping alert as they walked back in the general direction of her truck. It won't come to that, it'll stay the night and we can leave in the morning. I drove, it was easier, besides plane tickets can easily be traced. Bella nodded at the idea. Will my dad be alright here? Derek looks down at her, seeing the worry in her eyes. She was more worried about Charlie's life than her own. He can handle himself. His main concern is you right now. Bella shuffled closer to him, not really understanding why she felt the need to do so. She was unaware of just how deep pack dynamics when Derek was alpha, and with or without his pack, he carried that status to Derek. She was family, even if he didn't know a thing about her, but in his mind, he was already placing her as part of his pack. She was feeling the effects of the emotional and physical attachments that being a part of a pack came with. Members seek their alpha out in fear, comfort, guidance, and Bella being human and vulnerable, her body was responding to the claim that Derek had already made. It'll help you get through this, I promise. Derek was slightly surprised when she leaned into him, brushing her shoulder against his. It was something that Jacob and the boys did, and she kind of just picked up on it. They finally came across her truck, and he curiously watched as she placed her bags in before pulling out her keys. My car is back up that way, I'll follow you home. He waited for her to get in, watching as she attempted to start the truck. It sputtered and Bella groaned. No. Derek wrinkled his nose at a weird smell and looked at Bella and thought, pop the hood, he said, and he heard the small thump as she hit the lever. He opened the hood to her truck, frowning immediately. He slammed the hood down, and Bella gulped as she saw his eyes flash red. Get out of the truck, he urged, and was opening the door before she could even think. He blinked once, and his eyes were back to their hazel color. What's wrong, she asks, and he takes her hand, helping her out of the truck. Someone tampered with your engine. He starts to lead her down the street, keeping his nose, ears and eyes sharp. Bella shivered, her legs moving faster to keep in stride with Derek. The street was pretty much empty, and Derek had made it to his car and opened the passenger door for Bella, all but shoving her in. As he made his way to the other side, he could hear growls in the distance. He felt his fangs elongate, and he turned around in the central direction of the noise, letting out a roar of his own. He was letting whatever this was that he meant business. Most likely the creatures had never encountered anything like him, so he hoped that they would be kept at bay for now. He got into his car, his face back to normal, as he pulled out his keys, starting the car and making a sharp U-turn. Bella held onto the door, letting out a breath as they went speeding down the street. Is everything alright? She asks urgently, looking over at him, fear coursing its way through her. Derek nodded. Relax, we're okay for now. Creatures just trying to be the dominant ones. Most likely those shifters comes with the territory, he explains. Bella let out a breath, and Derek felt bad. This poor girl was being stalked. Her things being sabotaged, her life was hanging on a thin line. What was that thing you did that? Growled. Derek was nothing like the Lappish tribe, and she knew that just by looking at him that his species was far more superior than the pups here. Alpha or growl, whatever you want to call it, it's a warning. Where do I go from here? Bella instructed him on the turn, slowly relaxing as he drove with ease and precision. She noted that he had a thing for speed, but it wasn't terrifying. Derek calmed a bit at hearing her heartbeat drop back to a normal rhythm. He talked to her a bit about his own life, so she wouldn't feel so awkward when she came to stay with him. He told her everything he thought she should know about him. Peter, her father, who was adopted into the family. He broke down to her that there were more wolves like him, some good and not so good. He told her of his own pack and what she would be getting herself into when she came to Beacon Hills. There are other things out there, but you'll be well protected. These cold ones, I've only heard legends of them. I'm not surprised that they exist. They're dangerous, narcissistic, cold-blooded. We're not like the shapeshifter pack here. Our dynamic is completely different than theirs. Yes, you have the alpha, beta, omega, but we can drop status. An alpha can become an omega, and a beta can become an alpha when you're in a pack. You're one of ours, very in tune with one another. Right now you feel very comfortable, am I right? He glanced over at her, seeing her small nod. It's me. I'm not doing anything special, just my presence alone. That's a good thing. Bella nodded, glancing over at him. Not that I'm not grateful, but why did you decide to help me? Derek sped down the highway, looking over at her as she wrapped his jacket a bit tighter around her. He turned on the heat. Your family, after getting a bit of an idea of what was going on, I decided to come down, hoping to gather more information from you. Or Charlie, your father is right, you can't stay here. It's too dangerous, and if these vampires decide to follow, well, it won't end well for them. Bella swallowed at the threat. Thank you, Derek nodded. He followed her instructions back to Forks and pulled up to a stop outside of the home. This looks like Charlie, he chuckles. Bella smiles fondly. Yeah, has simple like that. He cut the engine and Bella stepped out grabbing her bags. She closed the passenger door and Derek followed behind, his nose wrinkling once again as that smell assaulted his nose. It was fresh and Derek moved forward. Stop, he commanded, heading in front of her. Bella paused, looking around frantically. He inches his way towards the home, hearing Bella behind him. Bella came to stand next to him, her heart beating fast. She looked around again, seeing that Charlie's cruiser wasn't in the driveway. That filled her with a bit of relief. She twisted the door open and reached inside. Flicking on the light, Derek moved in first, sniffing the air. His eyes widened as he rounded the corner towards the living room, and he was about to tell Bella to not come inside, but it fell on his tongue as she was already pushing her way through and past him. She stilled immediately, her bags dropping to the floor. She slowly walked forward, refraining from touching anything in the living room. All over the walls were pictures of her, various ones at different places in her bedroom, the shower. Bella shivered. Don't touch anything, Derek states, pulling out his phone. As he turns in a circle, he spots a message written on the wall in what looks to be black paint. "You are so beautiful, it'll be waiting for you." Bella softly gasps as she notices it too. Bella's heart rate starts to rise, her breathing becoming slightly erratic. Derek ushers her outside, sitting her down on the steps. "Breathe okay," he soothes, about to dial Charlie. He snaps his head to the side, however, as a man and two younger boys come from the woods. He knew these to be shifters from their scent alone, but knew they weren't the ones that had left Bella this message. "You need to leave," the one in the middle stated, pointing a shaking finger at Derek. Derek just raised a bushy brow. "Don't take orders. Sorry, you're supposed to protect people, right? How the hell do you allow the undead to stalk the innocent and expect her to fend for herself? Or is it because she befriended the enemy and to you that makes her not worth saving?" he asks calmly, keeping himself in check. Bella had since stood, her fight or flight instincts kicking in. She was petrified. On one hand, she wanted nothing more than to stalk over to the trio and slap them in their faces, but her fear of one of them tearing her to shreds was keeping her in place. Sam spoke up, then turning to glare at Bella. "You told." Bella clenched her teeth together, gathering some strength to stalk forward, yet kept herself behind Derek. She wasn't sure how fast he was, but the shifters weren't slow. "I didn't say anything that didn't need to be said. You won't protect me, and I am scared that when I wake up it'll be somewhere facing death. I didn't ask for this. I tried to leave him alone, and he won't let me. You can't blame me." Paul only growled. "If it weren't for you, the Cullens wouldn't have stayed any longer, and we could be living a normal life." He moved a step forward, and Derek growled in warning. "Don't, it'll snap your neck before you even have the chance. We want the same things. You want her gone, and I want her safe, which means getting her the hell out of town. We're leaving tomorrow, but until then keep these bloodsuckers off the property." Sam scoffed. "The best I can do is keep Charlie protected. You're on your own here." Derek bared his teeth as Paul tried to inch forward. "Take him or I kill him. I don't want to see you around here again." The three inched away back the way they came, and Derek went to call Scott. These shifters were proving to be a problem. He knew that the creatures of Forks knew he was in town, and he couldn't be off his game. Scott answered on the first ring. "We're about to board a plane to you." Derek's brows rose. How did you know?" "Jackson and we just felt like you could use some help. Send us the address." Derek nodded to himself, keeping an eye out for Bella as she paced. "These things aren't making it easy. They won't protect her, so that leaves me, and I don't trust anyone right now. Be prepared when you get here." He and Scott hung up and he turned to Bella. "Give Charlie a call and he'll work on getting that mess down, okay? Are you alright?" Bella nodded, sucking in a deep breath. "I'm just on edge," she replies, walking back inside, Derek following behind her. She went to call Charlie and give him a brief update. He won't be home tonight since he had a 24-hour shift to do before she called. He was about to call her and ask her to stay at the station until he got home, but he was eased at knowing Derek had arrived and briefly spoke to him. Derek could take the couch or his room if he liked, and there was food in the fridge. Derek told Charlie that the young boys would be down to help them get set up and keep an eye on things until he got Bella out of Fork safely. Bella had poked her head out the window to look at his car, and she glanced back at him as he worked on the writing of the wall. "I don't think my things will fit in your car," she murmurs. Derek didn't turn from what he was doing. "Make it fit. Pack the essentials. We can get wherever you need when we get to where we're going." He purposely didn't say where they would be going if there were any prying ears listening in. Bella nodded before turning to head upstairs. Derek focused on cleaning, hearing Bella shuffle around upstairs and move back and forth as she packed and tossed things. He started pulling the pictures off the wall, disgusted at the mere thought of them. There were very intimate photos of her either sleeping or in her room naked, or even in bra and panties. He started dumping them in the trash, shaking his head. As the night went on, Bella had tripped over a loose floorboard. "Are you okay?" Derek called up, stopping at the door of the stairs. "I'm fine." She calls back. Charlie had informed him of how clumsy she was. She looks down by her feet and decides to pull it up. A cloud of golden dust rises and assaults her nose, making her sneeze. She looked to see that they were her birthday gifts from when she turned 18. She frowned, snatching them up before tossing them in the trash. Derek had taken it upon himself to order pizza, and once it arrived, he called Bella down, watching as she came down with at least 3 bags full of trash. He just raised a brow and went to eat. Watching her for a moment, she sat on her couch next to him, grabbing a slice. "Tell me about you before all of this," he asks curiously. Bella nods and tells him about her life before Forks. Before she moved in with Charlie, Derek had never met Renee, but Peter wasn't very fond of her at how she broke Charlie's heart. "It was boring, really, a lot of moving around. I came to visit Charlie almost every year and spent most of my summers with him. When Mom met Phil, I decided to just move in with Dad. I felt she wanted the freedom to follow him during his baseball career." Derek nodded and thought, "Do you regret it?" Bella shook her head almost immediately. "I only regret the relationships I built. I won't trade Dad for anything in this world," she whispers. She went for another piece, glancing up at Derek. "You love him," he states quietly. "I do," she replies, her brows lowering as she seemed to be thinking about something. "What about friends?" Derek asks, closing the pizza box. Bella shrugged. "Never really had any mom, and I moved so much it was pointless. And well, here everyone is the same. I always felt out of place. I'm not a gossiper or the popular girl, or even the quiet kid. I'm nothing like these people. And with the Cullens, it was one of the reasons why I felt so right with them. I didn't feel so out of place," she says, her frown deepening. "They left me so easily. Sometimes I wonder if it was all a lie. With everything going on, it makes me question their every motive. Why befriend me? Why take the time to converse with a human? Do everything within their efforts to give me a cut and dry departure, and then when I'm ready to call it quits, it's suddenly a problem. How is that fair?" Eric crossed his arms over his chest, leaning back against the couch cushions. "It isn't. Vampires are enchanting for a reason. I believe that you were merely a toy to them, and your ex wanted to push you as far as he could until you broke. You were stronger than he realized, and he can't let you go. Now that I'm thinking about it, he won't stop. Hell, need to die one day," he states, glancing over at her as she yawned. "Get some rest, kid," he says to her, watching as she stands swaying a bit on her feet. She yawns again. "Good night, Derek." He nods. "Good night, Bella." "What's that god-awful stench?" Jackson utters as they step out of the yellow taxi. Scott shrugs. "No idea. Hess waiting for us." Jackson tilts his head, hearing the second heartbeat upstairs. It was more sporadic and nervous sounding. They walked their way up the driveway, each wolf looking around in passing before Scott went to knock on the door. Derek was pulling it open before he could bump his fist against the wood, staring at the two of them. "Were you followed?" he asks, looking around them before allowing them inside. "No," Jackson responds, that smell hitting his nose again. He stopped, though, smelling something a bit more potent in a good way that seemed to stick to the home. Derek eyes him curiously as he closes the door behind him. Scott and Jackson turned their heads towards the stairs as Bella started to come down with a box. Derek goes to her aid, taking the box from her hands. She smiles and thanks, turning to greet them. "Bella, this is Scott McCall and Jackson Whitmore, part of my pack. They'll be helping get you packed up and keep an eye on things for now." Bella shook Scott's hand, feeling the warmth of his skin. They didn't run as hot as the shifters, but they were abnormally warm. She turned to Jackson next, her breath hitching in her throat. He was handsome with short brown hair, an angled face that almost made him look like a model, and blue eyes. He towered over her 53 frame a good 6 inches. She guessed he was about 6 feet tall. She swallowed as they met eyes, and he gave her the smirk that read cocky. The good-looking one of the group, he grabbed her hand, shaking it while maintaining eye contact with her. Her scent wafted towards him, something primal within him reacting at the smell. She smelled sweet and spicy, and for some reason it was calming. She chuckled. "I can't thank you guys enough," she states, and her voice washes over Jackson, making him shiver a bit. Derek eyes him again, his eyes narrowing. "Your pack." Scott shrugs. "So I've been told," she responds. She moved to head into the kitchen. "Are you guys hungry?" she called out, rummaging through the fridge. "We can eat," Derek called out, letting Scott move around the house. He watched Jackson, who was transfixed on the short brunette in the kitchen. He could tell the young wolf had just experienced something. He could feel it. "She smells calming," Jackson admits, turning to look at Derek, hoping he'd be able to make sense of that statement. Derek just hums. "Your wolf likes her." Jackson just raises a brow. "Likes her?" Derek nods. "It's different for everyone, and not all wolves just tolerate anyone right off the bat. For some wolves it's strong, and for others not so much. You may find yourself being in tune with her or picking up things about her that others can't. All I'm going to say is that Shess had it rough, so don't be an asshole towards her." Eric walked away, going to grab Bella's box and load it into his car. "Wasn't planning on it," he murmurs to himself. Bella made some sandwiches and she figured they could eat more than the usual. She came from the kitchen, finding Jackson curiously looking around with Scott. "What's that smell?" Scott murmurs, looking to her for permission as he wants to go upstairs. Bella nods, leading him up. "I hope it's not me, but most likely it's the vampires. One was here yesterday," she says quietly, shivering slightly. Scott turned to glance at Jackson, the smell getting stronger the more they walked up. Jackson followed, and they ended up in her bedroom. The boys looked around curiously, and Scott moved to the window, looking down outside. It faced the woods away from prying eyes. Ella fidgeted as Scott started to stare out there for longer than usual. Jackson turned his eyes to her, seeing her pull her lip between her teeth nervously, her fingers intertwining together as she shifted from one foot to the other. He could smell it rolling off her and feel it course through him at the same time. Relax, he said, crossing his arms over his chest, not used to being so supernaturally observant with a human. It was making him slightly uncomfortable. Nobody is out there, he said a few seconds later, watching as she visibly tried to calm herself, taking a few deep breaths. If he hadn't been around Styles as much as he wouldn't have been so sure about what she was feeling, but he could see the oncoming signs. Do you have panic attacks? He questions, his focus entirely on her now, although he was aware of Scott doing something else within her room. Her brown eyes shoot to him in surprise. Once, how did you know? Scott spoke up next. Styles has them. We can usually hear it in his heart rate before he starts to experience his attack. Bella turned to him questionably. Styles. His idiot friend Hess, practically the only other human that hangs with us on a daily basis. Jackson shrugs, meeting eyes with Scott, who just shook his head minutely. Ella picked up on it of course and frowned. If I'm going to be spending time with you all, I would really like it if you guys didn't treat me as if I'm not in the same room. I catch the small things, you know. She looks to both of them, her face holding just slight annoyance, but she otherwise smiled at them. Scott's just eyeing how far he can see out there. Your trees prove to be a disadvantage, and we need to be able to see what's coming. She nods, kicking a box in Jackson's direction. She then pushed on Scott's way. If you boys can take those down for me, that would be great. They each grabbed a box with ease, and she went to grab her duffel on the floor so that she could open it up to put more clothes in. She quietly started to pack clothes, her thoughts in other places, as she thought about California. She's never been there and wondered what it was like. She was happy she at least had a family member or two. Eric was quiet as was she, and she figured they'd get along nicely. He was the brooding type, she gathered, but he was making sure to make her feel comfortable around him, which she was immensely pleased about. Even if they weren't blood-related, they looked like they were. She headed downstairs after a while to see Jackson, Scott and Derek munching on their sandwiches. One thing about Derek she noticed was that he was very intuitive and more observant than she liked. Are you going to eat? He asks around his food, watching her with keen eyes. Bella hadn't really thought about food since last night. She's been so nervous and stressed that food didn't tend to taste so great anymore. She shook her head and he slid his plate over with half of his sandwich left. You need to. You haven't eaten in almost 12 hours. She furrowed her brows. Had it been that long? He gestured for her to take the plate. She begrudgingly grabbed it, taking a large bite of it just to spite him. He just shrugged. No offense, but you're thin and as stressed as I know you are. You've still got to eat. You won't be of help to yourself. She swallowed her bite, pointing towards him. You're bossy, she murmurs. Eric just chuckles. Normally he wouldn't care what a teenager did or didn't do, but even he was feeling his own primal connection to her. He was going to help his cousin in any way he could. Scott and I are going to go get your truck from the city and bring it back. At the rate we're going, we can possibly be out of here by midnight or early morning tomorrow. We can get your truck either towed or shipped to where I live here. Joyce. Ella nods. I'll be thinking on it. Scott finished scarfing down his sandwich, throwing out a thanks as Derek dragged him from the home. Jackson knew the deal and that his job now was to be alert. He figured that with Derek and Scott leaving, these other creatures Derek mentioned would want to follow. They'd be more concerned about numbers. Jackson found himself too noticing how thin she was. She wasn't disgustingly skinny at all, but she could use a few pounds to be considered healthy. He wasn't aware that he was doing it, but he didn't finish his food until after she had finished her half. Once she was done, she glanced over at him curiously. Like Derek, she found herself calm around Jackson, something she hadn't been in a long time. Do you like being a wolf? She asks quietly. Jackson nods. It was a bit rocky at first, but I find nothing better than this, he says, finishing off his plate. She just nods, getting up to take it away from him. He glanced down at her wrist, grabbing her hand. Is that a bite mark? He asks, stunned. Bella nods, pulling her hand away. Can I? He asks, holding out his hand. Bella sits again and holds out her wrist. Their skin tingles as they touch and he runs his fingers across the marble-like skin that held cool temperature. What happened? He asks, looking up to meet her eyes. She frowns. The Cullens, the vampires, were playing baseball, and these 3 nomadic vampires heard them playing. They wanted to join, but seeing as I was human, the leader of the family said it wasn't a good idea. The wind just picked up, and before I knew it, I had a bloodthirsty vampire after me. To make this painfully boring story short, I fled to Florida. With 2 of the family members and I was tricked into thinking the vampire had my mother, so I snuck off and got my ass kicked. He bit me just to piss Edward off, and this is the only good thing Hess ever done for me. He sucked out the venom. It's very painful and burns. She rubbed her wrist at the sensation it brought just by memory alone. Jackson frowned. It's certainly not a boring story, he says, letting her wrist go. She smiled at him and stands back up to grab her plates. He watches her go into the kitchen, deciding to follow after her. He watched her for a moment as she took care of the dishes, and he noticed that she keeps glancing towards the clock, waiting for something. He asks. Charlie usually checks in by now, she murmurs. Maybe Hess just busy. Bella sighs and nods. You're right. Bella was very pretty, and Jackson could see there was fire behind her somewhere, but it was lost under all the fear she was going under. He could tell that she had a big heart and would do anything for the people she loved. She wasn't like the girls back home, she was certainly different. He perks up as he hears a truck outside, and he went to the window in the living room to look. A boy on steroids, he calls out, hearing Bella come shuffling behind him, looking outside as well, her long hair brushed against his arm, tickling his skin. Oh no, she murmurs. Jackson turns to her. Oh no, he repeats, watching her go pale. Hey, he says, wrapping an arm around her shoulders to keep her grounded. Hess, a shifter. Derek and I were supposed to be gone. She jumps as a loud knock sounds on the door, and a young voice carried through. Bella, open up. She squeezes her eyes shut, fisting her hand, her fingernails digging into the flesh, drawing blood. Jackson moves to stand in front of her, unraveling her hand. Bella, he whispers, getting her to open her eyes. She stares at him as he gets her attention to stay in him. Relax, I'm not going to let him hurt you. She jumps again at the loud bang on the door, her eyes now shifting towards the door. Jackson resists the urge to growl, knowing he'd just scare her more. Hey, eyes on me. That's right, it's okay, I'll take care of this. She nods, frantically flinching again as the door was pounded on. Wait a damn minute, he snaps back and moves to go to the door. Bella is behind him almost instantly, and he feels her fist on the back of his shirt. He wondered what happened to make her so terrified. He wrenches the door open, standing in front of Bella, eyeing the young teen. Who the hell are you? The teen snaps, and Jackson raises a brow. God, we'll all be leaving soon, so you can stop you whining. You're scaring the shit out of her. The young teen scoffs. That's not what I came here for, not yet anyway. It's about Charlie Hess been in an accident. Bella stepped out from behind Jackson, her own fears pushed to the side, a new one settling in. What would happen, she asks, and Jackson kept his arm on the door frame to prevent her from stepping out or the shifter from stepping in. It'll take you to the hospital, he says, waiting for her. Jackson raises a brow as the boy is clearly waiting for Bella to come outside and go with him alone. Biz Wolf growled at the thought. Yeah, well, make room for two, Jackson says, turning down to look at Bella. He comes with Jacob. Jacob rolled his eyes. Whatever, it's not like him going to hurt you. Bella frowns. Yeah, but you let them hurt me, so that means you're willing to do the same. What happened to you, she asks in disbelief. Jacob glared down at her and stepped forward. Jackson growled, moving in front of Bella. Watch it. His claws came out, and Jacob looked down in surprise and slight fear. Bella looks down as well, a bit odd. She realized that Derek did the same thing last night. Let's just go, Hess, at the hospital. Jacob turned around and stalked towards his truck. Jackson turns back to Bella as she was slipping on her shoes. What did you mean just now, that he let them hurt you? Bella stills for a moment, turning to look at him. She shakes her head, clearly not wanting to say anything. With Jacob outside, she pulls Jackson to the side and lifts up the back of her shirt a bit. He sucks back a breath at the claw marks on her skin. Jackson runs a finger along them, making her flinch slightly. Anger courses through him as the pieces connected. She moves away from him as he started to move his fingers up, getting the feeling that her whole back probably had claw marks. Come on, she says, and closes the door behind them as they head for Jacob's truck. Jacob pushed open the passenger door for her. He can hop in back, there's only room for one back there. Bella bites her lip, knowing she'd rather drink acid. Jackson closes the passenger door and opened the back door, sliding in first. Bella blushed as she'd be sitting on his lap, but she would rather do that than sit with Jacob or sit exposed by herself in the back. He grabs Bella's hand, hoisting her up and into his lap. He closed the door and put the seatbelt around them, giving Jacob a wink in the rearview mirror. Her scent calmed his nerves a bit, and he wrapped his arms around her waist, feeling her relax against him. His wolf preened at the feeling, looking to Jacob as he gave him a what tried to be a death stare. You look like a constipated kitten. Are we going or not? Bella snorted out in surprise, and Jackson grinned at seeing some form of positive emotion flash across her face. His eyes glowed blue as Jacob turned to glare at her. Jacob drove to the hospital, the truck filled with tension the whole ride. Jackson had sent a text to Derek letting him know what was going on, and Derek responded that they'd meet them at the hospital. Bella was quiet, fiddling with her hands again, her heart erratically beating. It only made Jackson nervous for some reason, and he attributed to what Derek had said to him. It made sense that he could sense things off of her, he could become affected by it. Derek, Scott and Jackson were one of the few wolves that really patched in with their wolves, making their physical connection stronger as well as their senses. Jackson was the only other person outside of Isaac to control himself during a full moon. He stilled her hands with his own, holding them together. Bella let out a shuddering breath, mentally counting to 10 to calm herself. Jackson pulled her back against his chest, hoping that it would do her some good. Bella could feel his heart beating at her back, and she timed her breaths with it. He cold and helped but gently knows her hair. Keeping her calm was the main priority right now. Bella closed her eyes for a moment, drifting off somewhere else for the moment. Jacob pulled to a stop outside of the hospital and cut the engine, waiting for them to get out. Jackson unbuckled them and slid over with Bella in his lap and out the truck, keeping a firm grip on her shoulder. He could smell the shifters inside and wouldn't be taking the chances of one of them getting close to her. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and he could tell Bella was trying to be strong, doing her best not to tuck herself into his side. He brought her clothes anyway. Following Jacob inside, there were 3 other boys waiting for them. Jacob joined them, intently whispering to them. "I can hear you, you know," Jackson says, annoyed with them at this point. They obviously know he isn't human and yet underestimate him. Head slit their throats in a second. Bella moves from him and goes to the receptionist, asking for Charlie. Jackson gave them a glare before moving towards Bella. A nurse led them to his room, and Bella stooped in the doorway, her hands covering her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispers tearfully. Charlie was all bruised up, his head wrapped in gauze. He was unnaturally still, and Bella looked to the nurse. "What's wrong with him?" The nurse frowns. "He was in a bad accident, miss. His car had flipped almost 10 times, and he was even lucky to be alive. Unfortunately, he experienced major trauma to the brain and is currently in a coma. We don't know if or when he'll wake." Bella nodded tearfully. "Can he be transferred?" The nurse looked Charlie over and then to the grief-stricken Bella. "I can see it's a bit early to tell, but Hess very strong, his vitals are immaculate, and if you can sign a few papers it can be done." Bella eagerly nodded and the nurse patted her shoulder along the way. Jackson stood guard outside the room as Bella went to Charlie's side, silently crying. He could hear her talking to him, and the pain in her voice made him want to howl at the sky. He could hear her breaking down even more, her soft cries becoming sobs of despair. Jackson looked up as Jacob came by. "You know you're not getting in there, right?" Jackson states, raising a brow. "I'm her friend, I just want to pay my respects," Jacob says, looking past him and to Bella. "A friend isn't terrified of her friends, or is your head too far up your ass to know that she's scared of you and every one of your little mutts for packmates?" Jacob lowly growled, stepping closer. Jackson only smirked. "Oh, did I hit a nerve? Steroids?" Bella pulled Jackson by the shirt inside the room, closing the door in front of Jacob's face. She locked the door and leaned against it. Jackson didn't say anything, instead offering to be there if she needed him. She sat beside Charlie's bed, laying her head down. She fell asleep pretty quickly, and that's when Jackson decided to call Derek. Derek needed to know, if he didn't already, what these shifters were truly capable of, and if Bella could get Charlie transferred, they needed to leave ASAP. "Is everything alright?" That was Derek's first question as soon as he answered the phone. "Yeah, Charlie isn't looking so good. Hess in a coma. Bella's here. She's knocked out. I know why she's so scared of them. They attacked her. She has claw marks running down her back like they mauled the shit out of her." Jackson lowers his voice as Bella shifts in her sleep. "Is that so? I can probably guess which one did it. We can get Charlie transferred. Tell Bella to tell the nurse to reach out to Melissa McCall at the hospital here. She can get him moved by tonight." "Are you almost here? Something doesn't smell right," Jackson mutters, confused at the situation. "I have the same feeling, as dangerous as these vampires are. I don't trust the shifters, they're weird. The 3 I encountered last night followed us here and is pushing us to leave. I know they want Bella gone, but they're not the protectors they lead people to assume. We'll be to you in about 30 minutes. Any problems?" Jackson sighed. "None really. This Jacob person is an asshole, and I'm going to rip him a new one. He scared her at the house, and it took everything in me not to rip him to shreds. She's not safe here." Derek not at all. Eric agreed and told Jackson to keep himself in check. He was realizing their connection was stronger than he thought. Bella signed the papers and gave the nurse a tired smile. "You're all set. In the next hour, we will have a transport team get him in a helicopter to your destination. You will be called when he has entered the hospital and is set up." Bella said a quiet thank you, her bloodshot eyes turning to look at Charlie. Jackson was waiting for her by the wall, and she gives him a smile. "You don't have to wait there, right across the hall," she says, moving towards the room. "I don't trust them," he says, simply following after her. He sat down in a chair and she sat across from him. "About your back, did one of them do it?" Or Bella leaned forward a bit. "It's okay, they left an hour ago." Bella visibly relaxed and nodded. "Just one. Paul is the one that had a problem with his temper, and I had come by one more time to get them to change their mind, and he just flipped. The only reason Sam took me to the hospital is because he knew that Billy, Jacob's father, would be severely upset if they didn't get me any help." Charlie and Billy used to be best friends after the incident, though Charlie stopped talking to him. "It's another reason Jacob can't stand me anymore. I think his father lost his only friend. Jacob has always had a crush on me, I guess, and because I chose the Cullens he hates me." Jackson shook his head. "That's doesn't excuse being a dick. I've had my fair share of moments, but to let you die simply because you don't like him, that's extreme." Bella shrugs, agreeing with him. "So you're an asshole?" she asks, trying to lighten her mood a bit. Jackson shrugs himself. "I can be, but that's what makes me so damn good." Bella chuckled at him, rolling her eyes. "Sure," she says lightly, her eyes going back to Charlie again. Meanwhile, Derek and Scott were leaving the police station, so we agree that it's time to get the hell out of Forks, Scott asks, hopping into the passenger side. Derek speeding off towards the hospital. "Yeah, call Jackson and tell him to be ready with Bella. We're leaving right now, and anything else she needs we can have it shipped or he'll get her new things." Eric made a quick stop by the house, leaving Bella's truck there and popping inside to see if she had anything else to pack. He grabbed a few sentimental items like pictures and things of that nature before giving them to Scott and hurriedly heading off to the hospital. Eric and Scott pulled up just as the other shifters did. He left the car running and Scott stayed outside as Derek made his way inside. "The hour too late," Scott says, tipping his head towards the Alpha. Sam just glared, making his way inside his pack, staying outside to watch Scott. Eric was speaking to a nurse. "No one goes in this room unless it is for him to be transferred. No one is allowed in. She and I are his only family and no one else is to be put on this contact list. Derek Hale, write it down so I can sign the papers. I'm over 21 and I'm signing for an early release. I want him on a helicopter within the next 5 minutes." The nurse frantically nodded, quite terrified. Derek signed the papers as well, and since there were 2 signatures, one being over 21, it had jurisdiction. He made his way down to where he could hear Jackson and Bella talking. Bella looked at him as he came to the room. "It's time to go," he states, and Bella looks like she's about to go into shock. She could feel that something was very wrong. "What's going on? I don't like being left out of the loop. What's happening?" Derek pulled on her hand and started leading her towards the entrance. Hospital personnel entering Charlie's room as soon as they left. Jackson brought up the rear, seeing Sam coming towards them. Derek passed Bella off to Jackson, who hurried his steps, wrapping an arm around her waist as Derek moved Sam out of the way. "Jackson," Bella murmurs, looking back to see Derek coming behind him, a stunned Sam on his ass in the middle of the lobby. Deep ahead, Jackson warns, leading them outside. Scott was waiting by the car, facing off against a few shifters. 3 against 1, that isn't a fair fight," Derek called out, his face changing as his fangs elongated. Jackson ushered Bella into the car and he bent down to make eye contact with her. "I need you to breathe, okay?" She nodded, slowly counting to 10 out loud. "Stay in the car," he said, his eyes flashing. Bella locked the back door and he went to help Scott and Derek. Derek pointed upon Paul. "You want to know what pain really feels like?" Derek flashed forward before Paul could even follow, clawing at any part of Paul he could get his hands on. Derek felt Paul's flesh tear underneath his nails, going as deep as he could go. Derek knew that these scars wouldn't heal the way they would if they weren't so deep. He clawed down Paul's face and neck, and even though his shirt, the marks were deep and blood immediately oozed from the wounds, Paul fell to the ground in agony as it burned, and while he was down, Derek gripped him by the hair, raking his nails through his shirt, slowly hearing his cry of pain. "That's for mauling my cousin," he whispered in his ear. Seeing that Paul was down, the others started to back away, realizing they were dealing with something they've never encountered. They went to grab Paul, and he screamed at the touch of their hands on him. Sam had come back outside, worry now evident on his face. Derek and the boys got into the car, Jackson sliding in next to Bella and Scott in the passenger seat. Derek burned rubber as he peeled out of the parking lot. Bella was having a hard time breathing again as Derek had blood in his hands, and with the quickness of removing her from the hospital, she didn't know what was going on. Scott turned around, then he too, hearing her breathing. Derek glanced back at her before looking at the road. "I'm sorry you had to see that, but we needed to get you and Charlie out the wreck your father had. It wasn't an accident. There were large claw marks in and on his car. The shifters deliberately caused his crash." Bella's ears rang as Derek explained it to her, the pictures of the scene he and Scott were able to get their hands on. They found out that Charlie knew some things about them, dark things, and planned to expose them to their people, and Sam and his pack couldn't have that. It was another reason why they hated her so much, and they were hoping by tormenting her on top of the Cullens that it would get Charlie to stand down. Charlie just didn't know they were that willing to keep him quiet. Eric expected her to freak out even more, but all she did was ask him to stop the car. He pulled over on the side of the road and she hurriedly got out of the car. Each wolf wrinkled their nose as they heard her throwing up. "Watch the tires," Derek mutters, looking at her through his side mirror. Eric pulled up to a stop outside his loft, looking over at Scott and then to Jackson. "I'm not driving either of you home, I hope you know that." Jackson rolled his eyes. "Obviously it's why we left our cars here." Derek turned his attention to Bella, who had slept the whole trip. It was odd that she didn't wake, and he assumed that she probably needed to sleep. "She was slumped against the window, dead to the world." "That's kind of unnatural," Scott says, looking to Derek. "Maybe, but she barely slept when I came. Stress will do that to you," he says. "Do we wake her?" Scott asks. Derek frowns, mulling it over. "No, just let her sleep, it'll take her up." Derek was the first to move, getting out of the car and opening the back door gently so she won't be jerked out of her sleep. Jackson and Scott stretched once they were out of the car. "You mind if we crash for the night? We just spent 6 hours each behind the wheel." Eric just grunted in response as he leaned inside, getting a grip on Bella before gently pulling her out. He closed the door with his foot, stopping for a moment as she positioned herself in his hold, snuggling herself into him. Jackson snorted, patting Derek on the shoulder. "No one hugs you, huh?" Derek glared. "No one's hugging you either, and for that you can sleep on the floor." Jackson just rolled his eyes. Whatever. They walked up the small flight of stairs and Scott grabbed the keys from Derek, opening the door. Derek went to his room and laid her in his bed rather than the little couch in the living room. She rolled over softly mumbling something before stilling. He kept the door cracked and went back to the main area to see Scott and Jackson already laid out on the cot. He hand in the room. He heavily sat on the couch with a sigh, leaning his head back, his eyes closing. As he slept, his ears kept alert on the pitter-pitter of Bella's heart. Morning rolled around quickly enough and Bella woke to hush talking. She stretched, opening her eyes, and took in the room she was in. She pulled at the black comforter before sitting up, eyeing her bag of toiletries on the dresser. She grabbed her bag, and right across from her was the bathroom. She almost tripped on a bag of brand new clothes. She made a mental note to get Derek something in return. She went about her morning business and helped herself to the shower, using his scentless shampoo to wash her hair. Her mind wandered to Charlie and she hoped that he was being taken care of. She made plans to go by the hospital today to see him. She thought about the major things she'd need, like a car and a job, wondering where she was even going to start. After showering, she brushed her hair and put it up into a ponytail and grabbed an outfit from the bag, surprised that Derek had gotten her size right. She had on a light pair of skinny jeans and a plain brown long-sleeved shirt. She chuckled as there was even a pair of sneakers at the bottom. She put them to the side before looking up at the knock on the door. She could tell it was Derek from the crack coming. Derek pushed open the door, leaning against the frame, with his arms crossed. "Sleep okay?" he asks, looking her over. Despite how long she slept, it certainly did her good as the bags under her eyes had faded a bit and she looked a bit more vibrant. Bella nodded. "I did, thank you. You didn't have to get all this stuff," she says, waving her hand around. He just shrugged. "I did. You only packed a few clothes and I didn't want you to have to spend your money." "It's fine," she smiled, watching him as he moved from the door and inside the room, sitting down on the bed. "This is my room, but you can have it for now until I find somewhere for you to sleep. If you have a couch, I'm okay with that." Derek smiled but shook his head. "No cousin of mine will be sleeping on the couch anyway. I have something for you." It seems like Charlie had this planned a lot longer than either of us realized. "I got a call today about a storage unit that was put in not only your name, but mine as well. When Charlie underwent his coma, I guess it's like dying, and the survived gets the assets." Bella frowned, "But Hess not dead." Derek held up his hand in a calming manner. "I know here this is addressed to both you and I didn't want to open it until you got a chance to read it." He hands her an envelope and Bella sees her father's chicken scratch handwriting. "Bella and Derek." She sighs and opens it to reveal a letter. She looks to Derek. "Was just waiting for her. Dear Bella. If you're reading this, then that means something terrible has happened. I'm writing this now as you are making dinner in the kitchen. I've been noticing that things haven't been right, not with you, since Edward came back. I also know Forks hasn't been right since the shifters changed him. Assuming you know what I'm talking about, you're not safe here, and it also isn't the Cullens you have to worry about. The shifters here are no good. I prayed that Jake won't change because he was always a good friend to you, but I can see now his changing into a wolf has made him just as evil as the rest. Considering what happened last summer with your accident, I can't allow you to get hurt, not again. And this is a key to a storage unit in Beacon Hills, California. There you will have access to money, passports and your own vehicle. Now I don't have a lot, but it's enough to get by. If I'm planning ahead correctly, I should have already told you about your family there. If I haven't, well, Thea's family there. I was adopted into the Hale family, and I won't go into a lot of detail. But here is the number for your Uncle Peter Hale. I want you to ask for Derek Hess, your cousin. He can help you. I hope he will do so and protect you with his life, as if you were blood. If he is with you right now, this is for him. If not, please read it to him or have him read it. Derek. That's my baby girl you've got there, and I want you to take good care of her. She's clumsy, bossy, with a heart of gold, so I know she'll find some way to be comfortable with you. If I'm dead, then no, it was murder. The shifters here are dark creatures. They're not the once protectors they used to be. As much as they say they hate the Cullens or vampires in general, they'd love nothing more than to spend the rest of their days fighting them in battle. Even the people of Lapish have their legends mixed up. I found old scriptures about the original spirit warrior, and he wasn't just a man, he was a demon possessing young men with his servants to make them believe they were given a birthright. Tahaaki was only the first man to fight the demon and do good. He erased the truth from his people because he wanted a clean start. I don't know what happened with this current pack, but I know they're not the shifters Tahaaki spoke highly of. I think they've meddled in something dark and have everyone fooled. Just last year a kid, Riley Beers, went missing, and I assumed it was the vampires at first, but I did some digging, and I strongly believe he was used in a human sacrifice by the current pack. I believe they want to find this original demon and bring hell on earth. I don't know how you or even I could stop it. I don't think we could. I didn't have all the proof either. I just needed you to know what I knew. At Bella out of Forks, the Cullens may come looking for her, but I'm sure you can handle it. They want her for nothing more than amusement. I thought they were different seeing as they ate animals, but they're vile creatures. Give my regards to your uncle. He'd be pissed knowing something got the jump on me. Here is the key to the storage unit. You'll find everything you need. Love. Charlie. Bella finished reading, a frown on her face. Derek patiently waited as she gathered her thoughts. She plopped the key into his hand before standing. Is he at the local hospital? Derek nods. Hess doing fine, but doctors suspect he won't wake. The damage to his brain was very severe, and if he ever does wake he like possibly suffer from complete memory loss. He frowned as her face fell, and he could smell the tears coming. He hated when women cried and Bella just looked so lost. She steeled herself, taking in a deep breath. He gave her a nod, silently telling her that he could see that she was trying and that she could do it. She could get through this. All hope was not lost. Just don't bottle it up, he says. He stands himself, giving her a playful smirk. He ruffled her hair on the way out and he heard Bella curse under her breath behind him. She slipped on her new shoes coming behind him. She looks around a bit more and realizes it's an apartment loft. It had a dark yet light ambience to it. She looked at Derek again, finding that it fit him immensely. Hey Bella. Bella looked over as Scott came up to her. Hey, she smiled. Scott too was very cute, having short black hair and that angled face she noticed they all had. She had to admit though that Jackson was cuter. She mentally facepalmed her train of thought, giving Scott her full attention. Here's my mom's number. Thought you could use it if you wanted any word on your dad. If Derek doesn't take you, I can show you around. Bella took the slip of paper from him, slipping it in her back pocket. Thanks as soon as I get a phone I'll put it in. He nods and looks down at her stomach as it growls. Each wolf turned to look at her and she blushes. I'd say we get you some lunch first, Derek says, grabbing his jacket before beckoning Bella out. Before she leaves she glances over her shoulder to see Jackson lounging on a chair watching her. She follows Derek, her cheeks turning redder. Scott grabs his own keys, tossing Jackson's his. You know you were staring right. Jackson furrows his brows. Was I? Scott rolls his eyes. You like her, admit it. Jackson comes to a stand, grabbing his sweater, brushing past Scott. Who I like is none of your business, McCall. Derek softly chuckles as Bella leans further down in the seat. She looks to him, trying to push herself deeper into the seat. The chair isn't going to swallow you, you know. Bella nods and sits up, looking around at the people that were staring at her. This is why I hate small towns, she mumbles. Derek sat back there, not saying anything. Too bad that kid thinks you're hot and the others are just wondering how I know you. Bella shakes her head with an amused scoff. Right, you're super. Hearing Derek nods. Get whatever you want, the breakfast is better than the lunch. Derek had taken her to a small cafe into town. Before they headed to the storage unit, Bella looks at the menu and decides on the big breakfast with pancakes, eggs, bacon and a biscuit. I can't believe I slept so long, she says, rubbing her eyes as the sun shined through the windows. I think you needed it. Do you know any self-defense? His question was random and Bella's brows shot up in surprise. Not really, she responds. They'll teach you. I think it would be good to have it. I'm not saying this because you're a girl and I know a few girls that can even kick my ass, he rambled, and Bella laughed softly, causing him to stop and look at her. You just don't want to worry about me, I get it. I never really got to say thank you. You know, a proper thank you for doing this just because family doesn't mean you had to come and get me. You're doing your best to make me feel comfortable and I appreciate that. I do hope that we'll build a nice relationship, she smiles. Derek nods slowly, not sure what to say. Me too, he goes with and watches her for a moment as she looks outside. A waitress comes up and takes their order and they silently wait for their food. Bella's watching all the cars go by and the scenery outside. It was nice and sunny, something she missed. Everything didn't feel so gloomy here. After a few minutes their food came and Bella wasn't ashamed to say she ate like a starving woman. She was less stressed than she was the previous day and had really worked up an appetite. Eric didn't comment though. He found it hilarious the way she scarfed everything down quicker than Styles, and Styles could eat. He didn't know where the boy put it, but Styles could almost out-eat any of them. After eating he took her down to the nearest cell phone store and told her to get whatever she wanted and that he'd pay for it, and this month's service she tried to go basic and Derek learned that she had his interest at heart rather than her own. She picked out the cheapest thing in the store and he just raised a brow before putting it back and getting her something newer. He just held up a hand as she tried to protest. You need it, he says, and after getting her on a plan that won't run her dry, he had her mobile equipped. She berated him the whole way back to the car and he just chuckled, listening and yet ignoring her at the same time. Bella refused to say it, but she liked it a lot, and the first number she put in it was his and then Melissa's work number. He drove them to the location of the storage unit and he pulled up to a stop. Before getting out he looked down at Bella through the window. You coming? She blinks, clearly lost in her own little world. She looks over at the place and scrambles out of the car. Slow down, Derek says. Before tossing her the key she catches it surprisingly and walks to the unit and inserts the key. Derek helps her push it up and her jaw drops at the black Honda Pilot sitting inside. It was the only thing in it and the keys were sitting on the hood. Bella walked inside and grabbed the keys, unlocking the doors. Inside was a lockbox with a small key next to it. Bella opened it, finding everything that Charlie had for her. She inspected it, finding that it was in immaculate condition. She went to the back, looking through the back window, peering closer as she saw a duffel bag. She opened the trunk, her eyes widening. Derek, Bella called and she heard him coming up next to her. What am I supposed with this, she asks, picking up a sticky note attached. This is 10 grand. What does a 19-year-old do with 10 grand? Derek whistled. Spend it, save it, whatever you want. She unzipped it, feeling overwhelmed at the green bills that stared at her. That doesn't help me, she says, and Derek lifts it and then lifts up the flap that holds her spare tire. Just leave it here for now, and if you don't want it in your truck we can put it somewhere like in a bank or a safety deposit box, alright? She sighs and nods, swinging the keys around her finger. So you gonna show me around town? Bella pulls up beside Derek at the hospital, cutting off her truck. Charlie picked out a nice vehicle she could see well, and it was sturdy enough for her. She hopped down, closing the door behind her, following Derek into the hospital. She wrinkled her nose at the smell of sterilization. They walked towards the nurse's station, where there was a woman in her mid-30s, maybe with long curly brown hair and brown eyes. Melissa, Derek called softly, and the woman glanced up, her eyes widening. As she noticed Derek, she turned her eyes to Bella, a kind smile forming on her face. She came from around the desk, holding out her hand for Bella to shake. Melissa McCall, Scott's mom, has told me a bit about you. How are you? Bella shook the woman's hand, instantly liking the positive vibe she got from her. Getting there, she admits, thank you for this. Can I see him? Melissa nods and leads Bella down the hall towards the room Charlie was in. Bella stops in the doorway, seeing as he was now in a hospital gown, his head bandage was removed and his heartbeat was steady. Bella hesitantly moved into the room, sitting down in the chair by his bed, grabbing his hand. Melissa quietly stood to the side, her heart breaking for the young girl, as she dipped her head and started to pray. Bella wasn't a religious person, but she knew that there was one thing she couldn't lose, and that was her father. Bella remembered that Renee probably had no idea what was going on, and she pulled out her new phone before standing. Melissa moved to the side. Visiting hours are till 6 p.m, so you're free to stay until that time. I work until 10, and if you need anything, just let me know. Oh, hold on, I circled some places on a map to help you find your way around town. I'll be right back. Bella smiled in kind and dialed Renee's number by heart. It rang a few times, and she decided to leave a message. Hey mom, it's me. I know it's been a while, but dad's in a coma. I'm okay. I'm staying with dad's adopted family. Derek has really nice. It's nice here. I love you, and when you get a chance, please call me back. I love you. She hung up the phone and Melissa was making her way over with a small map of Beacon Hills. She had a few places circled. This is the hospital, the high school. It's a good place to catch you bearing if you get lost. This is my place. If you get lost or something you can stop by. I'm sure Scott would let you in. I really do hope you enjoy Beacon Hills. Bella smiled, her eyes watering up a bit. She wasn't sad purse, but she was instantly reminded of Renee, who wasn't there, and the woman that only knew her because of her son was more kind to her than ever. Oh honey, Melissa murmurs, pulling the young girl into a hug. Bella heavily swallowed, feeling like a small child being embraced by a parent. Her lips wobbled, and for the first time since Italy, which was a little over a year ago, she cried. She cried for the girl she used to be when monsters didn't exist, the girl that didn't have her heart broken, and the girl that endured terror and pain at the hands of beings that were supposed to make you feel safe. I know the truth about what goes on, and from what I've heard you've experienced your own set of terror. If there are things you aren't comfortable talking to Derek about, I'm a listening ear. She placed her hands on the side of Bella's face. I'm not usually this forward with strangers, but she trailed off, smiling softly. Would you like me to tell Derek you're staying? Bella nodded, rubbing her eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to just start bawling on you. Melissa just waved her off. You're fine. Vending machines down the hall. There's a cafeteria in here, but it'd take your chances with the vending machine. Bella chuckled before moving back into Charlie's room. She looked at the time on her phone, seeing as it was already 4 in the evening. She plopped down in the chair, laying her head on Charlie's hand before closing her eyes. Eric opened the door, sighing at the person on the other side. What can I do for you? He asks, moving to the side to let Peter inside. I didn't really come here to see you, nephew. I wanted to see my niece, but I can tell Shess not here. Eric left the door open. Well, you can turn around Shess at the hospital. With Charlie, Peter frowned at the thought. Oh, his brother. How is she adjusting? Derek closed the door, setting the Chinese on the table. It's only been a day. Shess taking things in stride so far as can be expected. Shess trying to stay strong. Charlie pretty much has her set. I can't say for sure. Peter nodded. Do you think they're going to follow? Derek shrugged. I fucked up one of them. They want Charlie, so I don't know the vampires. Most likely Bella knows a lot about them, so I'm hoping that she can explain some things to us about them. Let them, and none of them will be going home. Peter raised a brow. You were never so violent, Peter taunted, plopping down on a chair. You would be too if you found out that one of the shifters mauled her so badly she has permanent scars on her back, and these vampires like preying on young vulnerable girls in the comfort of their home. Pete's nose wrinkled at the thought. Is that so? Derek just nodded, tossing him a beer. Well, I always love a good battle. Bella breathed heavily, drenched in sweat, staring Sam down as he chanted above her, holding a bucket. She rubbed her arms against the restraints. The fire in between them was hot and rising. She eyed the others as they stepped from the shadows, chanting louder with Sam, their eyes transfixed on her. Sam slowly moved around the fire staring down at her, his brown eyes dark, so dark they looked black. Her head snapped to the side as the Cullens emerged from the side staring down at her hungrily. Bella tried to speak, but no words would come out. Edward was by her side in an instant, gently moving her hair to the side, sniffing her neck. She screwed her eyes shut as he nosed her neck. Bella. Sam rumbled deeply, and she opened her eyes, freezing in place as he poured blood from the bucket over her head, a burst of eerie laughter chilling her to the core. Bella, Edward whispered. Bella woke with a start, jerking out of the seat with a startled yelp. Hey, Scott was in front of her, brows drawn in concern. I didn't mean to startle you. My mom's shift is over, and I didn't know if you were aware what time it was. Bella blinked a few times, sucking in a shaky breath. I didn't mean to sleep so long, she whispers, bringing herself to a stand. She wobbled a bit, feeling a bit disoriented. Scott steadied her, watching her closely as she took the keys out of her pocket. Her hands were shaking. Are you okay to drive, he asks, and Bella nods her head. He grabs her jacket for her and led her out of the room where Melissa was waiting down the hall with another boy around their age. The two had spiked hair, a bit shorter than Scott, dressed in a long-sleeved shirt and jeans. Bella, this is my friend Styles. This is Bella. Bella reaches out her hand to shake his. Finally nice to have a normal person in the group. Bella couldn't help but snort tiredly. It depends on what you classify as normal, she replies. Styles shrugs. You're not a monster, are you? A wolf, banshee, kanema. He started to list off different creatures, and Bella followed him out of the hospital. I don't know half of the things you just said, but no, I'm completely human, she says, and Styles visibly looks relieved, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. See, normal, say it with me. Normal. Bella looked back at Scott, who shrugged. Well, it was nice to meet you, Styles, and I'm sure I'll be seeing a lot of you. Thanks for letting me stay, Mrs. McCall. Melissa waved her hand. Melissa, and it's Ms. You know how to get to Derek's. Bella nods, unlocking the door to her truck. Bella's hand shakes as she holds the keys, her body taking a moment to adjust. Melissa and Scott made eyes before he went to her aid, stopping her hand. How about I drive you? Bella looks over to Melissa and Styles. It's okay, you were going to take them home. Scott led her around to the passenger side, opening the door for her. She tiredly gets in, and he goes back over to Styles and Melissa. Do you mind following us there, and we can go home after? Styles nods, catching the keys. Melissa kisses his forehead, mumbling something about how she raised a good son. Scott got into Bella's truck and started it, heading on to Derek. Styles and Melissa followed behind them. Bella stared out the window for a while, and Scott glanced over at her curiously. How was your first day in Beacon Hills? Bella looked over at him, thankful for an interruption. It was nice, it's very pretty here. Derek set me up with some things, and all I need now is to find a job. Scott nods. There's a nurse assistant position open at the hospital. Y'all know one person there, he offers. I'll look into it, thank you, he nods. Is it weird being around more supernatural creatures? Bella sits up a bit. Not really, I'm not terrified, so that's a good thing. I just keep having this horrible dream. Scott looks back at her before turning to the road again. What is it about? Bella groans softly. You're going to think him crazy. Scott just chuckles. I doubt it, besides I know a thing or two about dreams. Well, I know someone who does. Bella caves and tells Scott about the dream with Sam and the Cullens. Scott was quiet at first, not sure what to make of it, and he pours a bucket of blood over you. Do you know what Hess chanting? Bella shakes her head. Some language, yes, and I'm covered in it. Edward is just about to bite me, and then I wake up, it scares the life out of me. Scott just hums. My boss knows about these kinds of things. I'm sure he can make sense of it. Bella glances over at him. Is there anyone in this town that doesn't know about the supernatural? Scott shrugs. Half of the population. Bella just hums. Scott was soon pulling into the parking lot, and he circled Derek's place on the map for her for next time, and she thanked him. After waving goodbye to Scott, Melissa and Styles, she heads on to Derek's loft. Before she can even knock, the door opens and here's Derek. I was just about to come looking for you. You got here okay? Bella nods, stepping inside. Scott drove me home. She didn't elaborate on why, and Derek didn't question it. I got Chinese if you like that. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I went with the simple things. Bella nods. Chinese is cool. She removes her jacket and hangs it up. Oh Bella, this is Isaac Leahy. Bella turns to see a rather tall boy with brown curly hair. We share the apartment, so y'all see him around from time to time. Bella sends him a wave. Nice to meet you, she says before scurrying past the two and to Derek's bathroom to shower. She wanted to wash the smell of the hospital off of her. After showering, she dressed for the night and ate dinner with Derek and Isaac while they watched some mindless television show. I don't understand what the point of this is, she mumbles, hiding her yawn in her sleeve. Isaac shrugs. Neither do I, but it's somewhat entertaining. Derek tosses her a blanket as she laid her head on the edge of the couch. The next few days for Bella was kind of on repeat. She, despite Derek's efforts to refuse, paid him back for the money he spent on her, and he discreetly just slipped it back in her duffel bag of money. Derek would drive with her around town to help her get used to it. She would visit Charlie every day, often talking to him about how she was adjusting. It was a weekend, and most of the wolves were doing their own thing, so it gave her some time to spend with Derek and getting to know him. Like she suspected, they were both quiet people, But Bella found herself being able to talk to him about things, and despite his broody mood he was a great listener, and he gave her advice anywhere he could. She spoke a lot about Charlie, and it helped her cope a bit with him being in the hospital. She learned that he also didn't cook and neither did Isaac, so she went grocery shopping, ignoring the stares and whispers. She got a list of things that both wolves liked and knew she could make some meals with the ingredients. She and Derek were currently in the grocery store where she tore off half of her list and handed it to him. He raised a brow at some of the items. I don't think we have some of these things, but I'll gladly find a substitute. Bella beamed at him, and Derek just ruffled her hair in passing, knowing she hated it when he did that. He just tried to get her to smile. She was becoming restless again at night, and she did more tossing and turning than sleeping nowadays. She had explained her dream to Derek as well, and while he didn't show his worry, it was very bizarre. When she napped she'd sleep for hours, but when nighttime rolled around, she could barely get in a wink. So to get her to sleep he'd wake her really early with some excuse knowing she'd nap in the day. It somewhat balanced out the lack of sleep she wasn't getting at night. She was starting to adjust rather well, and she even went ahead and applied for that position Scott had told her about. While she had a feeling that her past from Forks was nowhere near done with her, she was able to relax a bit knowing she was safer in a different state. It was also sunny constantly, and she didn't think the Cullens would want to expose themselves. When it came to the Cullens, they each had a way about them that made Bella feel out of place. Edward had become dark, and suddenly Alice was all about everything. Edward wanted Jasper, and Rosalie still disliked her, but yet never tried helping her of a way out. Emmett and Esme claimed to care about her, but not once did they check on her. When Edward had started to change, Carlisle had become the follower to the coven rather than the leader, letting Edward and Alice call the shots more often than not. Bella was happy that she could breathe again. She looked at her list, finding that the seasonings she needed were on the very top shelf. She made her way to the shelf, wondering how the hell she was supposed to reach it. She stood on the tips of her toes, reaching out with her arm, trying to will it to grow. Come on, damn it. She held onto the metal of the railing with one hand, trying to balance in her toes, as her fingers were just barely touching what she needed. She suddenly felt someone at the back of her, and a hand easily grabbed what she was reaching for. She turned around, coming back down on her feet to see Jackson smirking down at her. "Is this what you wanted?" he asks, and Bella nods as he hands it to her. "I was seconds away from climbing the shelf," she admitted, pointing back towards it. "Do you mind grabbing those others up there?" Jackson reaches up to grab what she needs, putting it in her buggy. "You cook?" he asks, motioning towards her buggy full of meats, vegetables, cheeses, etc. She nods. "Yeah, Derek doesn't, and I don't think I can eat Chinese 3 nights in a row." She chuckles, blushing a bit as he stared down at her with interest. "How are you liking our exuberant town?" he asks, walking with her as she starts for a different aisle. She scoffs. "The people are so friendly. It's nice though quiet." He wrinkles his nose. "I give you a week, and you won't be saying it's nice." Bella laughed. "Fine," she says, motioning towards the small items he had in his hands. "What did you come here for?" he shrugs, returning some things. "Since being I don't need these protein shakes anymore, and I'm hoping they'll take them back." Bella hums, looking around for Derek. "Do you have a phone on you?" Jackson asks, and Bella stops her buggy out of the way of everyone and digs into her bag. "I just need to make a call." Bella hands her phone over. As he dials a number, she looks down as his phone starts to ring in his pants. He hung up the call and handed it back to her. Bella felt her cheeks turn even redder, and she slipped it back into her bag. "You cold?" "Just ask," she says with a smile. Jackson just shrugged. That seemed boring. He winks at her, and Bella shakes her head. "See you around." They easily melted into the crowd of people, and she shakes her head again. She finally meets up with Derek, who had gotten almost everything she wanted with a substitute ingredient here or there. "What are you making tonight?" Derek asks as he helps load the groceries in her truck. "Tacos," she says happily. He narrows his eyes at her, taking a small sniff. "I don't even wanna know." She furrows her brows at him before closing the trunk. They hop back into her truck, and she rides back to Derek's. She pops the back glass top for easier access, and Derek hops out to go collect the bags. Bella pulls out her phone, smiling slightly as she added Jackson's number to her contacts. She shook the grin off her face, sighing she shouldn't be thinking about him or anyone except trying to focus on herself, but she couldn't deny that he was different than any other boy she's ever met. She looked at his number once more, finding that it was easy to memorize. She always liked to memorize numbers in case she couldn't get to her phone. She stepped out of the truck and helped Derek with the rest of the groceries. As she started stocking his fridge and cabinets, he kept out what she would need to make dinner. "Is that enough for us?" she asks, turning to look at him. "Plenty. Next weekend is pack weekend, so you might need to head to the store again this week and get like triple of what you have now." She nods, placing a magnetic list on his fridge. "Pack weekend, where you guys get together?" and she asks, bending down to place cold items on the shelves, wrinkling her nose at the stuff he had in there. "Unwind, I guess." "Hey, don't throw that out." Bella turned to look at him in disbelief. "It's old by like a week." She chucks a few things in the trash, and Derek shakes his head. "I see what Uncle Charlie meant by you being bossy in a very childish manner." Bella sticks her tongue out at him, for once feeling like she didn't have the world on her shoulders. She felt like a teenager for once. She moves on to making dinner, and Derek decides to help her way around the kitchen. About an hour and Isaac comes in poking his head into the kitchen. She cooks too. Bella smiles at him in greeting, and she gives him a spoon to let him taste. I like her, he mumbles, going for another spoonful. Hey, Bella slaps at his hand, and Derek chuckles. That's enough. Bella continues on with dinner, and half an hour later the three were planted in front of the TV. They ate in silence, watching the same show from last week. Isaac and Bella were more engrossed in it than Derek was, the two quietly trying to figure out what was going on. After watching a few episodes, Bella retired for bed, and the boys cleaned up for the night. Isaac retreated to his room, and Derek planted himself on the couch, thinking if he could turn part of the living room into a bedroom, either for himself or Bella. He might as well just give her his room, seeing as she needed her own bathroom. After a while he fell asleep, only to be awoken an hour later by screaming. The sound jolted him awake, and as he gained his bearings, he realized it was Bella who was screaming. As he got up, Isaac had rushed out of his room. Alarmed, Derek pushed open the door, flicking on the light. Bella was sitting up in bed, looking down at her hands, her hair so damp from sweating. Derek rushed to the side of the bed, sitting next to her, grabbing her face. Wake up, it's just a dream, he said, and Bella blinked rapidly, jerking away from him and pushing the covers off of her. She ran her hands down her body as if brushing off something. Bella, Derek said, capturing her attention. It's okay, he says softly, and Bella swallows, still brushing herself off, a scared sound coming from her. Breathe, you need to breathe, he says, slowly holding out his hand for her to take. She grips it, and he places it above his heart so that she could match her breathing with his. After learning that she suffers from panic attacks, he did some research so that he could be better prepared. Her breathing was erratic, and she held her other hand to her chest, her eyes widening a bit. Derek could hear her heart beating faster and knew she was having trouble calming down. Count to 10, slowly, count with me, 1 2 3, keep going. He takes in some deep breaths, and Bella kept her eyes on him. Isaac stayed with her for a moment. Bella squeezed his hand harder, and Derek gently pulled his hand away. It's okay, I'll be right back. Isaac took his place, pulling up the sheets a bit so that she wouldn't feel so exposed. He kept his breathing calm like Derek did, holding eyes with her. Derek came back about a minute later, 2 pills in his hand and a glass of water. What are those? Isaac asks, and Derek pops the pills in Bella's mouth, then tilting her head back so that she would swallow the water. Styles' medication, he left them here, and I figured she'd be okay to take 2. How do you feel? He asks, concerned, peering closer into her eyes. They were less dilated than the seconds prior as she started to calm down. She just nods at him, her breaths now in short pants, and she laid back against the bed again, her grips on Isaac's hands still tight. She closed her eyes and Isaac visibly relaxed. Her grip is tight, he murmurs, wincing a bit. Eric just watched her for a moment, and Isaac made a move to slip out from under her grip, but she made that noise again. He looks at Derek, confused. It'll bring you a blanket. Derek tosses him a blanket, and Isaac falls back asleep, keeping some space between them. The next morning, Derek is sitting at his breakfast counter sipping a cup of coffee. His door opens, and he glanced up to see Jackson and Styles. This is a surprise, he mutters. Stalinska's Jeep is in the shop. McCall is working, and he apparently forgot his meds here, so Jackson shrugs. Derek grabs his medicine from last night and hands it over, and the only reason you drove him over was because Jackson was never that nice. Because he wants to see your hot cousin. Styles moves out of the way from Jackson's hit. Derek rolls his eyes. Of course you do, I gave Bella 2 of those. She had a panic attack last night, and it was the only thing that calmed her down. They all turn to see Isaac coming from the bedroom, his hair a mess and his shirt wrinkled. Styles looks to Derek and then to Isaac and then to Jackson. Oh, this is funny, he laughs. Looks like something else calmed her down too. Styles wiggled his brows, and Isaac shook his head, going into his room. Seriously, Jackson asks, looking to Derek for confirmation. He was hoping to take her out next week, get her to see the town a bit. Derek just chuckles. Surprisingly, my cousin seems to have a weird interest in you, and no, you think he'd let him in her room? She slept better with someone next to her and finally calmed down for the night. Jackson wouldn't admit that he felt a bit better at knowing that information, but he could tell from the smug smile on Derek's face that he already knew that. Styles put the medicine in his pocket and he looked at Derek. Music helps, I've heard, not really my thing, but it may help her at night. Thanks, sounds like she's still sleeping, so I'll tell her you stopped by. I try to get her up at this time of day, but considering last night she needs it. Jackson looks back towards the room in slight longing before grabbing Styles and heading out. Derek looked towards his cousin as she came out of the room 10 minutes later. He just shook his head. Here's some coffee, do you want to talk about it? Bella's smile is replaced with a frown and she just shakes her head. Over the next week, Bella had cooked different meals for the boys to try and prepared snacks a few days in advance for their pack night. Monday morning, Melissa had called to tell Bella that she had gotten the job as a nurse assistant, and after asking Bella about which schedule fit her best, she was placed with Melissa for the afternoon through the night shift. Friday was Bella's first day, and as bummed as she was knowing she'd missed the night where she got a chance to meet everyone, she was excited to be getting somewhere. As Bella was still trying to figure her way around town, especially at night, Derek proposed that he'd drive her to work and either he or someone else would pick her up at least for a little while until she got used to it. She still struggled to find his place as there was a turnoff that was kind of hard to see at night. She just told him no and that she'd have to learn eventually. Bella was starting to see Derek as somewhat of an older brother and it gave her a chance to focus on herself rather than being the adult. She had told him that the other day and he just looked perplexed that she'd even say such a thing. She noticed that when they first arrived he hardly smiled. Now she would see just the faint pull of his lips if she looked hard enough. "See you at 10," Derek says, and Bella gets into her truck heading towards the hospital. Melissa was waiting for her in the lobby, a welcoming smile on her face. She slowly integrated Bella into the works, showing her how to keep track of her patients and to basically shadow her. Since Bella didn't have a certificate for nursing, she had to hang back when Melissa would administer something, but she was free to watch. She encouraged Bella that going into nursing could be a good thing, seeing as Bella had a knack for trying to help people. Many of the other nurses liked working with her and taught her little tips and tricks for her first day. Bella really enjoyed it, and before she knew it, it was 10 and Melissa was packing up. "It'll walk you out, I might stay here for an hour or so, talk to Dad a bit," Bella says and walks Melissa to her car. Melissa smiles. "Alright, text me when you get home safe." Bella chuckles and nods. "Will do." Bella really liked the woman. She went back inside and after clocking out slipped into Charlie's room, bringing along her favorite book. She sat in the chair and softly spoke to Charlie. "Hey Dad, I miss you. Everything has been really good. Derek is great. I haven't met Uncle Peter yet, but I'm sure I will this weekend. Mom still hasn't called me back and I think she's just really caught up with life. She did text me though. I haven't been sleeping well lately and I haven't told Derek what I've been seeing. I don't want to worry him, but there's this thing in my dreams and it's very terrifying. I wish you could wake up. I really need you to wake up." She uses the shower while she's there and changes into her clothes and out of the scrubs Melissa had given her. She kisses Charlie's cheek on the way out, smiling at the cards and balloons some of the pack had brought over. It made his room feel less dull. She says goodnight to one of the nurses and texts Derek that she was on the way home. The parking lot is kind of empty and she unlocks the door, setting her phone and bag inside. She slips the keys into the ignition, but before she cranks it, she turns her head to the woods, her eyes narrowing. She hated the woods, despised them ever since Edward broke up with her. Her eyes widened slightly as she saw the dark figure from her dream. It was a shadow figure with horns on its head. She cringed as it seemed the glitch, turning its head in a way that was certainly not human. Bella hopped into her truck and started it, heading home. She found the correct turnoff this time and parked in her parking space. She looked around in the dark and a streetlight to her left dimmed a bit and under it was the dark figure again, just standing there. It had no face or any distinguishable features. She looked away from it, afraid to get out of her truck. She laid her head on the steering wheel. "It's not real, it's not real," she repeats to herself. 1 2 3 4 5. She took in a deep breath. "Just open the door and pretend you don't see it," she whispers. A knock sounds on her window and she screeches out in fright. She places a hand on her chest, looking up to see Jackson. She lets out a sigh, cutting the engine. Once the doors unlocked, Jackson opened the door. "Didn't mean to scare you," he chuckles, looking her over. Bella steps out, grabbing her bag, keys and her phone. She looks over his shoulder to glance at the streetlight, but there was nothing there. He furrows his brow, turning in the direction of her gaze. "Everything okay?" he asks and Bella nods, closing the door. "Yes, sorry, how was your night?" He walks with her back towards the apartments, the usual supposed to be pack bonding time. "It was kind of boring," he admits, and Bella glances at him curiously. "How so?" she questions, walking up the steps. Jackson puts his hands in his pockets, matching her movements. "You weren't there. We apparently decided on this romantic comedy, and it kinda sucks when you don't have a pretty girl to cuddle up to." Bella looks down, chuckling. "Believe me, I'm not fun company," he shrugs, walking her to the door. "I think so. So what do you say about breakfast Sunday morning? It'll have you back before work." Bella glances up at him, seeing the mirth in his eyes. "What if I said no?" she teased. Jackson licked his lips and pulled a hand from his pocket, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "You'd be lying," he stated. Bella narrowed her eyes. "And you know that?" How his lips upturned in a smirk. "Your heart stutters when you lie." He bent down, placing a kiss to the side of her mouth, and Bella knew she was probably as red as a tomato. "So see you at 8, dress casual." He turned and started to walk down the stairs. "But I didn't say yes," she called out. "Your heart did," he responded back before disappearing around the corner. Bella leaned against the door, placing a hand to her flaming face. Bella sat nervously at the breakfast bar, biting her fingernails. She kept glancing over at Derek as he was on the phone. She pushed away her breakfast for probably the 5th time, her stomach bunching in knots before her stomach would growl and tell her that food was much needed. He gave her a glance, clearly wondering what had her bothered. "Sure, it'll hold." Derek pulls the phone away from his ear and raises his brows at her. What's wrong, he asks, and Bella sighs, pushing the plate away. It can wait until after you're done, she says dismissively. Derek just narrowed his eyes at her. Okay, he replies, slightly watching her for a moment before he turned his attention back to his phone at whoever he was talking to came back on the line. She looked down at her phone as it vibrated, smiling as she saw it was Jackson texting her. Breakfast or brunch? Bella thought about it for a moment. Brunch. He sent her one of the winking images and she sent him back a smiley face. She felt like a schoolgirl. See you in the morning, he replies, and Bella quickly types. It's a date, a blush spreading across her pale cheeks. She picked at her food, but ate half of it. By the time she finished, Derek was getting off the phone. He sat across from her, snagging her plate. He stares at her for a moment, and his intense gaze makes her squirm. Who knew hazel eyes could be so intimidating? You've been fidgety, he notes. He didn't just see it, he could feel it. Spending almost the last week with her alone, he had become to recognize her emotions, so much so that he could feel them within himself. Bella just sits there very still, waiting for him to continue. He just raises a brow, clearly expecting a response as to why she's been feeling the way she has. I saw something last night, she blurted out, keeping her eyes on his. Hers were wide pupils, dilated mouth set in a frown. His face was blank as usual, his eyes just staring at her intently. Something like, he asks, and Bella's brows crinkled. You believe me, she asks instead. After the nightmare's panic attacks, Derek just nods. This is Beacon Hills. If you saw something, there's a 90% chance you saw something. So what did you see? Bella swallows heavily. She could blink and it was fresh in her mind. Do you remember the demon Charlie told you about in the letter, that it possessed people, and that the current shifters in Forks might gotten their hands on it or heard of it? Derek nods, his attention fully on her. She let out a shaky breath. I saw something last night on the way home. I was getting into my car, and I looked over by the woods and it was dark, but this thing was darker than the night itself. It had horns, you know, actual demons, the ones we see in the Bible or the creepy paranormal shows where they edit it to make it look like it's spazzing out or something. It was dancing, trying to get me to follow it. Derek turns concerned. Did you follow it? Bella frantically shakes her head. No, but I could feel it willing me to do so. I came home, and before I got out I saw it again, standing under a streetlight. It just stood there, and it had no face, no eyes, nothing, but I could feel it staring at me. Jackson came outside and it was gone. She wrung her hands together, staring at her fingers. Derek let out a sigh. Come in, he called, and Bella glanced towards his door as it opened, entering in an older man with dark brown, kind of black, that sat slightly curled and a bit longer than Derek's. He had dark bluish green eyes and a thin top lip. Bella assumed this was Peter. Her assumptions were right when he flicked his eyes to her, a small smirk on his face. Well, look at my niece all grown up. Bella didn't have any memory of meeting this man, not at all, but she smiled hesitantly. He was wearing a simple gray long-sleeved shirt, a pair of black pants and a pair of dress shoes. I remember you when you came down for a summer with Charlie. Bella's brows furrowed. My memory must suck, she chuckled, and Peter moved forward, reaching out a hand. Bella shook it, her eyes widening slightly as she could feel his claws. She pulled her hand back unused to the side, and Derek rolled his eyes. Why must you do that? Peter shrugged, his claws retracting. Just wanted to see her reaction. She'll have to get used to them if she's spending time around a bunch of temperamental boys. He rolled his own eyes, sending her a wink. Derek just shook his head. That doesn't mean freak her out in the process, he grumbles. Bella just chuckles. Fine, just not used to it. Used to angry teenagers turning into horse-sized wolves when they're out of control. Her nose wrinkles at the thought. Ah yes, those little mongrels, such a shame. Derek just raises a brow. Right. He flicks his eyes back over to Bella. About this thing you saw, if you see it again, it advised going to Alan Deaton. Scott works for him. Hess the only vet in town, so it shouldn't be hard to find him. I have Scott's number if you need it to get in touch with Deaton. He'll probably have a better idea than I do. Bella wasn't that good at reading Derek yet, but she was good at reading what Wasson said. You're worried, she asks. Peter looks between the two. Someone want to fill me in? Peter comments. Worried isn't the word, but it's not good that in your dreams it's not just a coincidence. Bella swallows again. Is he open on weekends, she questions. Peter sighs. Not invisible, you know. Bella finally glances up at him, and she blushes. She explains to Peter her dreams, and then the figure she saw last night, and how it looked. He was a bit easier to read, and she could see concern on his face. I've never heard of anything like this, but I could do some digging of my own. I do advise, however, dear niece, that you do not follow it. I'm not a very religious person, but I do know a thing or two about the Bible. Demons will present themselves to you as itself a loved one, a spirit just to lure you in. You're only seeing a side of it that it wants you to see, meaning that this creature, if we are calling it a demon, is much more terrifying than what you're seeing now. Shivers ran up her spine, and she purses her lips, staring at him. He leaned away and looked at Derek. It's nice having family under one roof, he says, and Derek raises a brow. You don't live here? Derek smarts. Peter shrugs. We could all be back at my place. Derek shakes his head. It's a rundown dump. It needs major fixing and remodeling before anyone can live in it again. Peter just sighs. Who says I'm not? Working on it, he sends Bella a wink, and she can't help but smile. Alright, well, it'll be in touch. He gave Bella a pointed look and quietly left the way he came. Bella glanced over at Derek. Question for you. Are you the overbearing protective type when it comes to teenagers like myself, or more like I don't give a crap type? Eric looks confused by her question. I personally don't care. Are we talking about you specifically? Bella nods. I mean, you're not a child, and I'm not your parent, nor really your guardian, seeing as you're over 18. So on one hand, I don't care what you do, but I won't say that I won't be the responsible adult when it comes to you. Your father entrusted me with your care, and I'm not going to let you do something or put yourself in a situation where you could get hurt. Is this the answer you were looking for? Bella thinks on it. Yes, so if I told you I had a date, you're not going to pull a dad move. Derek laughs a full-on stomach-holding laugh. She glances at him, surprised. She didn't think the man smiled a real smile, let alone laughed. After calming down, he shook his head. No, I mean, it'll have every right to scare the little shit, but assuming that this isn't just some random person, which I know it's not, you only go like 3 places, he already knows the deal, so there will be no need to scare him. I will however tell you this: Jackson is different. There are 2 sides of Jackson, the cocky bastard we see on a daily basis, and some soft side of him that no one has barely seen. If you can pull that out of him, then great, but I want you to know what you're getting yourself into. I can tell he likes you, and by the way, you react, I can tell you like him. I just want you to remember that we aren't human, we aren't normal, and he isn't the typical boy you see on the street. When I bit Jackson, it didn't turn out like it should have at first, and that's for him to explain to you. Hess an okay guy, really. Hess just a bit different like Scott, and I Hess very close with his animalistic side. Hess, not the small town boy like the guys in places like Forks. If you date Jackson, great, it'll know you'll be safe with him, but if it doesn't work, that's okay too. If he breaks your heart, then I will break bones. Does this answer your question? Bella nods. I'm used to Charlie pulling out the gun, so I guess y'all pull out claws. She chuckles. He flexes his wrist, and she sees his nails grow right. She chuckles. Sunday. Bella smoothed down her tank, pulling on her jeans a bit nervously, fiddling with her fingers. It was Sunday, and Jackson was due at any minute. She twirled around in the mirror, giving herself the once over. A knock sounded on the bedroom door, and assuming it was Derek, she said a quiet come in while in the bathroom. Do you think this is too casual for brunch? She called out, rolling her eyes at her. Derek wouldn't care at all. He'd tell her yes, just because he didn't know what to say. I think you look perfect. Bella's eyes widened at the voice, and she quickly swiveled around to see Jackson leaning against the doorframe, a smirk on his face. He was dressed in a simple beige tee and a pair of jeans that were oddly snug, yet loose around certain parts of his legs. He had on a nice pair of sneakers, his hair spiked in its usual fashion. She's seen him with. She blushed, staring into his eyes, an odd feeling stirring in her heart. It was different and quite alarming. It felt somewhat natural, and that terrified her. She sent him a smile, calming herself down. Is it 8 already? She asks, and he smoothly moves out of the way for her to walk out of the bathroom, catching her wrist gently. He placed a flower behind her hair. Actually, it's 8:10. She turned her eyes to the clock, glaring at it for being 5 minutes low. Sorry, she says, her face turning hotter as he just smiled down at her. You look great, she murmurs, looking him over again, her eyes lingering on his perfect face. I know. He wiggles his brows and her shoulders relax as she lets out a laugh. Of course you do. You ready? He asks, letting her wrist go as she went to slip on some shoes. He curiously watched her as she leaned against the table for support. He wondered how clumsy she was. He found that on her, it was probably endearing more than anything. Now I am, she smiles, and he glides behind her, eyeing her wallet she picked up. He takes her hand, experimentally threading his fingers through hers, and he likes the way her eyes light up and her heart stutters. It literally skipped a beat. They walk from the bedroom, and Bella sees that Derek is nowhere to be found. She sees a note in the table and quickly reads it. Stepped out, have a good time, here's a gift. Bella smiles at the house key waiting for her on a keychain, and she slips it in her pocket. Jackson leads her out of the loft, and Bella locks up. They quietly walk down the stairs, and Bella gets a chill remembering the last time she was out here. So where are we going? She asks as he opened the car door for her. Yowl, just have to wait and see, he smirks before closing the door. His car was a bit different than a normal teenager, and it wasn't hard to tell that Jackson came from money, yet one thing she liked is that he didn't flaunt it, at least not to her. It smelled like him, and it wasn't just cologne, it was a deep-rooted smell, and it made her feel comfortable. He got in on the driver's side and started his car, pulling out of the parking lot swiftly. She noticed that Jackson was smooth, very smooth. The way he talked, moved, did anything really. It wasn't a to impress you smooth, it just seemed to flow from him. They quietly chatted in the car, and Bella found it easy being with him. She learned a few basic things about him, like he was adopted, he too played lacrosse in high school, liked to swim, and he wanted the bite, simply because he was somewhat jealous, and wanted what Scott had. Bella liked that he was at least honest about himself towards her. That's what she liked the most, honesty. Bella in turn told him a bit about her childhood, her summers between both parents, even the strain on her relationship with Renee then, and especially now. Jackson listens with full attention, not wanting to mess this up. Like with most people, they grew with maturity. Jackson was still that same Jackson he was in life, but a bit more reserved since graduating. Since he met Bella that day in her home, has been consumed with the thought of her. He wasn't sure why, but he knew that he wanted to get to know her. Things just seemed to slip out of him naturally, and he surprised himself. What he found odd was how in tune he was. To her, he listens to her heartbeat just to gauge her reaction, and then before he knows it, it's constantly in the background like second nature. Even as Hess talking to her, he glances at her momentarily before turning his eyes to the road again. She was looking out the window, a small smile on her face. Jackson is soon pulling into a small diner a little ways into town. He cuts the ignition and gets out. Bella regards the place with interest, going to open the door, but Jackson beat her to the punch, opening it up for her. She smiles shyly as he takes her hand, helping her out of the car. Before gently shutting the door, he locks it up, steering her towards the entrance. He opens the door for her, and Bella walks in a calming atmosphere, greeting her. The place was like a mom-and-pop diner, and the smell of coffee put her in a relaxing mood. The place wasn't full of people, but there were lots of people around her age, and she figured this was where a lot of teens frequented for a relaxing morning. Jackson steers her towards a booth where he takes a seat across from her. "I used to come here as a kid. It's never changed since." She listens intently as he tells her a bit about his childhood, and she gathered that while he was left to his own devices as a child, and even more so as a teen, he despises it somewhat. He seemed to always be on his own. Bella kind of understood where he was coming from, having dealt with that with Renee as they order and wait for their food. Bella takes the time to admire Jackson, her cheeks flaming when she realized that he was doing the same. "Are you up for a little ride?" he asks, and Bella shrugs. "Sure. Is it going to be a surprise too?" He crosses his arms and just smiles. Bella softly groans, her smile still in place. "So it's like that, huh?" Their food arrives, and Bella decided to go with something safe like a muffin and fruit, giving Jackson his props for the suggestion. He of course ordered the stack of blueberry pancakes, and Bella was reminded of the shifters. They too could eat hefty helpings. The little diner was bustling with noise and oldies music playing in the background. Bella found her feet tapping against the floor, and a small smile crosses her face. Jackson raises a brow, an amused expression on his face. "I know this song," she chuckles, leaning back and humming with a tune. Jackson had heard it many times actually, but just smiled at her as she seemed to enjoy herself after they finished eating. Jackson had decided to drive her around town, taking her down to the high school to show her around a bit. It was empty of course due to the summer, but would be opening again in about a month. He gave her a tour of the school, ignoring her reprimand of breaking and entering. She looked upon the trophies with wonder, admitting that she wished she had played a sport in high school. "Why didn't you?" was his question as they left the way they came. Bella just shakes her head. "I'm literally the clumsiest person on this planet. On my very first day I hit a boy in the back of the head with a volleyball. I told them not to let me play." She mused, lightly hitting his arm as he laughed. "I see why they stopped letting you participate." He chuckles, grabbing her hand again, this time looking at their fingers in slight wonder. "You keep doing that?" "Why?" Bella asks, staring up at him, curiosity flowing in her eyes. Jackson just shrugs. "I'm not sure," he responds, looking down at her, confusion in his eyes. He felt like a schoolboy with a crush, which was kind of pathetic considering he hasn't known Bella long. Her small smile though made it worth the confusion. Jackson had indeed gotten her home before work, both of them promising to go out again next time to lunch or a movie. Derek had simply asked her how her brunch had gone, nodding when she replied that it was, in her words, perfect. One thing about Derek was that he also didn't hover. He left her to her own devices and was gone more often than not due to getting his own pack under control. Bella would finally get a chance to meet the pack this upcoming Wednesday as it was her day off, and she was excited. She was hoping that she could make friends with them at least. It would be good to know familiar faces. Unfortunately after today, Bella won't be seen for 2 days. Sunday's shift was the usual, and she noticed that it was less hectic than a weekday. It was like the calm before the storm. She had gotten used to the sight of blood, not a lot, but enough to not feel queasy. Melissa had finally convinced her that she go to school, she should go for nursing. Bella would honestly be good at it. Melissa thought she had the compassion and kindness that it took, and also believed Bella could keep herself under control during tense situations. Bella liked it so far and got along well with everyone. Charlie was still out, and the odds of him waking up were more and more slim. Bella's relationship Renee was only getting worse. She had finally called Bella, freaking out as usual, but made up excuses not to come to California, using Phil as a scapegoat. Bella had started to give up on Renee a bit, and being close to Melissa, the woman could see that some of Bella's life was crumbling. Bella had confided in Melissa about Renee and what has been transpiring between their phone calls. Melissa kept her thoughts to herself, but she believed that Renee just didn't care and was wrapped up with her own life. To do anything supportive, she would just nod and hold Bella's hand as she Cried silently trying to understand why Renee was being the way she was. This shift was no different in terms of her mother. This time Renee had called Bella asking how she was doing, and Bella gained a false hope that she was coming around. Instead Renee gave Bella an ultimatum. Bella could come live with her or she could stay with Derek, but they'd never speak again. Bella didn't know how much Renee knew about Charlie's adopted family, but Renee simply didn't like them and harshly told her daughter that it was them or her. Bella didn't want to choose, why should she, but she had been down that road before and she chose Derek. Renee had told Bella to simply give Charlie her condolences if he ever woke and metaphorically washed her hands of her daughter. Bella didn't understand it and she tried to ask Renee what was the problem, but like always, Renee was living her life. That's what she wanted, no child to take care of and no one else to worry about. Bella had tried to keep a brave face during her shift and by the soft looks Melissa kept sending her, she knew that something was bothering her at this point. Bella just wanted to go home and have a good cry. She sat with Charlie for a while holding his hand, but it didn't help ease the comfort. Melissa's voice startled her out of her thoughts as she walked into the room. If you need to go home, I understand. Bella glances up at her, pursing her lips. It's okay, it's a slow night, she whispers and hands Bella her bag. Bella comes to a stand and Melissa pats her back in passing. She runs into Scott on the way out, who can easily see that something is wrong, and he gives her a concerned glance. Everything okay? He asks her and follows her outside. Bella sucks in a deep breath. Everything is just fine by the crack in her voice. They both know it isn't and Scott isn't sure what to do. Hey, if you ever need to talk, him here. Bella gives him a watery smile and he watches her get into her truck and drive off before heading inside to meet his mother. Melissa just shakes her head, feeling sorry for the girl. Things were going quite well. Bella drives through the darkening road, wiping away the tears angrily that kept flowing. That just wouldn't stop. She stopped at the stop sign, laying her head on the steering wheel. She can't stop the broken sound that passes from her mouth. Bella. The eerie whisper has her looking up in fright and she looks out of the window where the trees sat just a few feet away, her heart stuttering at the sight of that creature. It beckoned her forward and Bella had no control over her body as she unbuckles her seatbelt, opening the door and stumbling out of her running vehicle. Come to me, Bella shakes her head in a futile attempt to stop herself, but her legs move forward, the demon hissing at her in an almost purring manner. Bella blindly walks her way into the trees, the figure slipping deeper into the woods, and Bella's shoes walked across the hard leaves and twigs, her eyes seeing nothing but darkness, her hands out in front of her as she stumbled. Yes. The whisper sent chills down her spine, and her grief was replaced with fear, a whimper slipping from her lips as she felt the extreme heat circle her. You will help me rise. She could feel ice-cold breath on her ear as the words were whispered harshly to her. She couldn't speak or move other than the direction her body was going. She let out a small hiss as something sharp runs down her back and she could feel the cool air biting at her skin. Her shirt had been sliced down the middle and she wrapped her arms around herself, willing herself to stop moving. No, she murmurs and her foot catches on an uprooted tree and she stumbles forward, unable to catch herself, and she falls onto the forest floor. Panic was slowly overtaking her. She hates the woods and Peter had warned her not to follow this thing, but her body couldn't help it. It was pulling her in the direction it wanted her to go. She freezes as she feels her shoes being yanked off of her feet, but couldn't feel a hand. She scrambled away as best she could, sharp wooden pieces digging into her hands. She shrieks out as her pants are suddenly yanked off as well, leaving her in her bra and underwear. Up it hisses and Bella shakes her head as it starts to rain. This time she could feel something surrounding her, and even though she couldn't see it, she knew what was targeting her like this. Leave me alone, she cries, shielding herself if it tries to attack her. She feels a force of some sort grip her by the hands, dragging her up to a stand. It is time to come home. Bella's unable to pull away and her legs move on their own accord. She's trying to remember how far from home she was. She wasn't sure how good werewolves' hearing were, but she would do everything she could not to end up lost here wandering these woods until she died of starvation. So she'd scream his name until she couldn't muster a sound. Her lungs burned with the force, Derek's name bellowing from her chest with a high-pitched screech, terror in her voice, and she was jerked harder in whatever direction. He can't save you. Despite the warning, she kept up yelling out for Derek or help in general for hours, her legs soon giving out on her. She was still being dragged along, unable to break the iron grip on her hands, the rain saturating her hair and body, making her shiver violently. Please, she whispers out hoarsely, and her hands are suddenly dropped and she falls to the ground again, just laying there, her legs burned. She was hungry, tired, petrified, and she had no idea where she was. She couldn't see a damn thing, but she knew she was alone, her torturing friend having left her there. She hadn't the energy to move, shock still rocking through her at the fact that something invisible or intangible had gotten her out, her with an intent she wasn't sure of. Late Sunday evening. Eric almost crushed his phone looking towards the door, hoping that Bella would walk through. Her phone had finally gone straight to voicemail, and he ran a hand through his hair. He looks up as the door opens, his hope dwindling as it's just Scott, who just shakes his head. Nothing. But we found her truck. Derek was moving before he even realized it, following Scott out. He paused briefly at seeing Styles. And Noah, this isn't good, is it? He asked, closing his eyes as Noah gravely shakes his head. It's not looking too good, it's weird actually. Derek lifts his eyes at that, getting into the car with Scott as Styles and his father lead them to the last place Bella had been. She had barely even left the hospital, maybe a good 10 minutes away, and another 20 from Derek. Scott pulls over and Derek hops out, going towards her truck. Don't touch anything, we turned the car off, but based on his things look we can assume Shess wandered off, but there's no sign of a struggle, although it could possibly be a kidnapping. I'm not sure she left her purse, phone, everything is here, just not her, Noah says, coming to stand next to him. Derek tries to catch her scent or anything for that matter, but the rain had washed most of it away. I can't smell her that well, but there's a tiny trace of it barely going in that direction. They all look over where he was pointing towards, and dread filled Derek's gut what Noah asks, noticing the look on his face. Oh, don't tell me this is something supernatural, isn't it? Derek can only nod, pulling out his phone to call Peter. I'm kind of busy. Well, unbusy yourself. What did you find out about that thing Bella had mentioned? Not much, it's too broad. Why? I think she followed it or it lured her somehow. Shess missing, and the only way she'd go into the woods would be unwillingly. How long has she been gone? Melissa sent her home around 8 and it's almost midnight, 4 hours. It's been raining heavily, so I don't know what kind of scent we're going to be able to catch. It'll meet you at Eaton's. He seems to know a lot about the unknown. Peter hangs up and Derek looks at Noah. Shess in there? I know she is. How soon can we start a search party? Noah goes back to his vehicle and gets on the radio. He looks back at Derek with a nod. Once everyone gets here, we'll start. Derek, Scott and Styles meet Peter at Eaton's. Peter had already told him what was going on and Derek helped fill in the information about Bella's dreams and what Charlie had told him in his letter. Deaton's expression didn't help any. He led them inside, where he then sat down with a book. He flipped through it for a few seconds, stopping at a page. This demon that she claims to see, did she describe it like this? Black, like darker than the night itself, had almost a compelling type of nature, pretty much something out of a nightmare. They all nod aside from Styles, who looks slightly weirded out. Well, I'm afraid this isn't looking good for your friend, based on what her father has told you. This is an ancient demon, very old, and most likely it draws energy from its victims, usually people that are feeling low and upset. Now, you said she saw this thing the other day, but it was unable to influence her. How was she feeling today? Derek thought back on her mood today, confusion evident in his voice. She was fine, happy, well, as happy as can be for the most part. Scott frowns. She didn't look so happy when Mom sent her home. She was very upset. My mom thinks it had something to do with her mother. Peter's lips curled up at the mention of the woman, shaking his head. I mean, if it was something that upset her to the point where this demon could lure her, then I'd say she was feeling very upset. Do you know what transpired between her and her mother? Scott shakes his head. No, sorry. That doesn't matter. What does this thing want with her? Peter asks, irritation clearly seeping from him at the thought that this was Renee's fault. Based on what Yav told me of her dreams, everything really, it wants her for something, maybe even to come through our world. I have no idea, only these shifters may know the answer to that question. I do, however, suggest that you find your friend and family member, not only because of the potential danger she may be in spiritually, but also the current weather we are about to go through. A large storm front is hitting in a few days. We're getting nothing but rain this week, and this weather is only going to get worse. At that, Derek's cell rings and he answers without looking to see who was calling. Hello? Eric, it's Officer Parrish. We found some female clothing in the woods, and we need you to identify them if they belong to your cousin. Derek, this was becoming more bizarre. After confirming that the clothes belonged to Bella, Derek didn't like what these clues were leading up to. The humans believed that somebody had lured her out here and have either planned on doing something heinous or have already done so. Derek just knew that whatever happened at that time, she was petrified. He could still smell it, sticking to her clothes like glue. Each wolf split off with a search team going as far out as a 10-mile radius. One team had found her tennis shoe 2 miles from the road, and Derek found the other 5 miles out. Derek's panic was slowly skyrocketing, as 8 miles from where her truck was found, her underwear and bra were found just feet away from each other. It was almost like another Lydia situation all over again. Out there was a naked girl running around. She was much farther than they anticipated. Finding nothing more to go on, Noah released her picture into the press the next morning, keeping it strictly in the Beacon Hills area. They didn't think she was in another city, and if by chance the shifters or Cullens were snooping close by, they didn't need a straight shot to her hiding place. Having seen the news or being called by one of the pack, everyone met at Derek's the following morning to search on their own. They were attempting to get out and look before it started to rain again. Isaac shakes his head as Derek wearily heads up the stairs. Derek knew that she was out there lost, probably wandering around. He just didn't understand the bizarre circumstances surrounding her disappearance. It was weird, eerie and frustrating. It's like she just vanished. The whole police department was out there looking in every place they could. Dogs seemed to lose the scent after a while. Nothing Else to go on the pack had no such luck. Derek had spent Monday night searching the woods on his own, opening up his senses to gather anything that could be useful. But the rain washed away anything that could have been of help. Styles was with his father, trying his best to see what he could find or pick up on. But the authorities were just as clueless. Their theories stemmed from kidnapping to assault. Or one they didn't want to think on just yet. Murder. Derek believed that she was still alive. A feeling was all he could hold onto at that thought. He believed that the figure she fears was most likely connected to Charlie's story, and it wanted her. What for he didn't know. He wouldn't be going back to Forks to find out, though he'd have to do some research on his own and figure out how everything connected. But first, finding Bella was top priority. Jackson seemed just as frustrated as Derek, not understand how a girl could just go missing. He had heard the many theories of what people thought happened to Bella, and they just irritated him at best. Some people believed that Derek had something to do with it, or that she just ran away. Others thought she was a nutcase, and some believed that there was a kidnapper killer out there ready to take on Beacon Hills. He was questioned about Bella the day before, as he had saw her that morning, but he was quickly ruled out. Along with Derek, officers had taken to questioning the hospital staff, who had all seen Bella leave alone. Scott was questioned as he was the last person to speak to her, and like everyone else, he had no idea what could have possibly happened. It was baffling, and Noah was getting pressure from worried parents and guardians about their own children's safety. He had advised that everyone stay away from the woods, and unfortunately for Beacon Hills, some people didn't get the memo. A teenage girl had gone missing the day of and hasn't been seen since her shift at work. People were starting to panic, and these 3 days were turning into a nightmare. It was raining again. It flowed down the dark roads freely. Jackson laid in bed, worry consuming him. The more he sat still, the more the night went on. He was as clueless as everyone else. All they could go off was supernatural related, but there was nothing to do about it at this point. Searching the woods was only taking up time, and it was proving to become challenging. Jackson's cell rings, and Hess this close to letting it go to voicemail, but he grabs it, answering, hoping for some news. It was more than news when the girl herself came on the other line, her voice hoarse, shaky and hopeful. Jackson sat up so fast he gave himself whiplash. Bella, where are you? Are you okay? He was already getting out of bed, throwing on some clothes and his shoes within a matter of seconds. Okay, I am at the "you are now leaving Beacon Hills" sign. Is Derek okay? Jackson's brows rose. You're on the outskirts of Beacon Hills. I'm coming to get you. Derek's fine, just worried like the rest of us. Bella murmurs something softly, and Derek could hear someone in the background. Woes with you. This couple found me and let me hold their phone. Yours was the only one I memorized. Jackson, can you bring me some clothes? Please. Clothes? Oh yes, stay put. Okay. Bella hung up the phone and Jackson was grabbing his keys, heading out the door. The end.